Willow Creek, Colorado, 1878. A woman's scream shattered the afternoon silence as rough hands tore at her leather purse. But Beatrice Langford wasn't the type to surrender without a fight. What happened next would change two lives forever: a Boston schoolteacher and a weathered cowboy, brought together by violence and courage on a dusty frontier street. Stay with me until the end of this story, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale has traveled. This is a story about love born from fire. The afternoon sun hung merciless over Willow Creek, Colorado, turning the main street into a ribbon of white dust and wavering heat. It was the kind of day that made sensible folks seek shade and cold water, the kind that stretched time thin as paper. Beatrice Langford stepped down from the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad coach with her carpetbag in one hand and her leather purse clutched tight in the other, squinting against the brutal glare that seemed to bounce off every surface. She'd traveled 3 days from Boston, and every mile had stripped away another layer of the refined world she'd known. Gone were the cobblestone streets, the gas lamps, the orderly flow of proper society. Here, at the edge of civilization, the rules were different. She could feel it in the way men stared, not with the polite, averting glances of Eastern gentlemen, but with open curiosity, sometimes hunger. Beatrice was 32 years old, which made her a spinster by conventional standards, but she'd never much cared for convention. She stood 5 feet 6 inches tall, with dark hair pinned severely back from a face that was more handsome than pretty, strong cheekbones, a determined chin, and gray eyes that had learned long ago not to flinch. She wore a practical traveling dress of dark blue wool, dusty now from the journey, and boots that had seen better days. The town of Willow Creek sprawled before her like something from a dime novel, though considerably less romantic in reality. False-fronted buildings lined the main street: a general store, a saloon called the Silver Dollar, a barber shop, a hotel that optimistically called itself the Grand Continental. Everything looked temporary, as if the whole place might blow away in a strong wind, which, given the dust devils she'd seen whirling across the prairie, wasn't entirely implausible. She'd come here to teach. The advertisement at the Boston Gazette had been terse but compelling. School teacher wanted. Willow Creek, Colorado territory. Must be of strong character and willing constitution. The salary offered was modest, but it came with room and board, and more importantly, it came with escape. Escape from her sister's pitying looks, from the marriage proposals of widowers seeking unpaid housekeepers, from the suffocating certainty that her life had already been written and all that remained was to live out its predictable chapters. The West promised something different. Danger, perhaps. Hardship, certainly, but also possibility. Beatrice adjusted her grip on the carpetbag and started down the street, searching for the boarding house where she'd been told a room awaited her. Mrs. Abernathy's respectable lodgings for ladies, the letter had said, 2 blocks past the church. She was halfway down the street when she heard the hoofbeats. They came fast, too fast for the crowded street. Beatrice turned, and in that split second saw a horse bearing down on her, its rider bent low over the saddle. The man wore a bandana pulled up over his nose and mouth, and his eyes, the only part of his face visible beneath his hat, were fixed on her purse with predatory intensity. Later, people would ask her why she didn't just let go of the bag, why she didn't step aside, surrender the purse, avoid the confrontation. But in that moment, with dust billowing and danger charging toward her, Beatrice Langford made a choice that came from somewhere deeper than reason. That purse contained $243, every cent she'd saved from 5 years of tutoring wealthy children, every penny she'd squirreled away while living in her sister's house. It represented her independence, her future, her ability to survive in this harsh country if teaching didn't work out. And she'd be damned if she'd hand it over to some masked coward. As the horse thundered past, the rider leaned down and grabbed for the purse strap. But instead of releasing it, Beatrice held on. The momentum yanked her off her feet and dragged her several yards through the dust. She felt her dress tear, felt gravel bite into her shoulder, but she didn't let go. "Get off!" she screamed, finding her feet and pulling back hard on the strap. "It's mine!" The bandit tried to wrench the purse free, but Beatrice had hooked her arm through the strap and was pulling with all her considerable strength. The horse, confused by the conflicting signals, began to dance sideways. That was when Beatrice saw her opportunity. She released one hand from the purse and grabbed the rider's ankle, twisting hard. The man shouted in surprise and pain, losing his balance. His grip on the purse loosened. Around them, the street had erupted in shouts. Men poured out of the saloon and general store, but no one moved to help. This was entertainment, a spectacle. The crazy Eastern woman fighting a horse thief in the middle of the street. The bandit recovered quickly, kicking out with his free leg and catching Beatrice in the shoulder. Pain exploded through her, but she didn't fall. Instead, she lunged forward and did something that would shock the town for weeks to come. She sank her teeth into the man's calf. He howled, a sound of genuine anguish, and jerked his leg back so hard he nearly fell from the saddle. In that moment of distraction, Beatrice gave one final desperate yank on the purse strap. The leather gave way. The bandit tumbled backward, hit the ground hard, and scrambled to his feet. For a moment their eyes met, his shocked and furious, hers blazing with triumph and rage. Then he spat in the dust, grabbed his horse's trailing reins, and vaulted back into the saddle. "Crazy bitch," he snarled, and wheeled the horse around. Beatrice stood in the center of the street, breathing hard, her purse clutched to her chest. Blood trickled from scrapes on her palms and arms. Her hair had come loose from its pins and hung in wild tangles around her face. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, and she'd lost a button from her collar. She'd never felt more alive. The bandit kicked his horse into a gallop, heading for the edge of town. Beatrice watched him go, her heart still pounding, her body flooding with the strange electricity of survival. That's when she heard the second set of hoofbeats. This rider came from the opposite direction, emerging from behind the livery stable. He sat tall in the saddle, his horse a massive dappled gray that moved with muscled grace. As he approached, Beatrice saw he was dressed in working clothes, canvas trousers, a faded blue shirt, a leather vest worn soft with use. A dusty black hat shaded his face, but she caught the glint of sun on his jaw, the line of his shoulders. He didn't chase the fleeing bandit. Instead, he rode straight toward her, and as he drew close, he reined the horse to a stop. The animal tossed its head, dancing slightly, but the rider controlled it with easy competence, barely seeming to move. For a long moment, he just looked at her. Beatrice found herself staring back, caught by something in his bearing, a quality of stillness that seemed rare in this violent, restless country. Then, slowly, he reached up and tipped his hat. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and gravelly, warm as bourbon. "That's my kind of woman." The words hung in the dusty air between them. Around the street, the gathered crowd began to laugh and cheer, breaking the spell. Beatrice felt heat flood her face. Whether from embarrassment, anger, or something else entirely, she couldn't say. "I don't need your approval," she said sharply, her Boston accent crisp despite her breathlessness. "And I certainly didn't need your help." Something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, she thought, though his expression remained serious. "No, ma'am, I can see that. Look to me like you had the situation well in hand, or in teeth." More laughter from the onlookers. Beatrice's flush deepened. The rider swung down from his saddle with fluid ease, and for the first time she got a clear look at him. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of someone who made his living through physical labor. His face was weathered by sun and wind, probably in his mid-30s, with deep lines around his eyes and mouth that spoke of squinting into distant horizons. Dark hair showed beneath his hat, and his jaw was shadowed with a few days' worth of stubble. But it was his eyes that held her, pale blue, almost gray, steady and assessing without being aggressive. Eyes that had seen hard things and decided to remain kind anyway. He took a step closer, and Beatrice caught the scent of horse and leather, dust and something else. Sage, maybe, or prairie grass. "You're bleeding," he said quietly, gesturing to her scraped palms. Beatrice looked down at her hands, suddenly aware of the stinging pain. Blood mixed with dust on her skin, and she realized she was trembling, the aftermath of fear and adrenaline catching up with her. "It's nothing," she said, but her voice came out less steady than she would have liked. "Miss Langford?" The new voice came from the boardwalk. Beatrice turned to see a plump woman in her 50s hurrying toward them, her face creased with concern. She wore a respectable dress of gray calico and a white apron, her graying hair tucked under a modest cap. "Miss Langford, is that you? Oh, my dear, what's happened? I'm Mrs. Abernathy. We've been expecting you, but not like this." Mrs. Abernathy, Beatrice said, grateful for the distraction. I apologize for the spectacle. There was an attempted robbery. Attempted being the key word, the cowboy interjected, that hint of amusement back in his voice. The lady here gave old Jack Dockery more than he bargained for. You know who that was? Beatrice demanded, rounding on him. Know him, yes. Dockery's been causing trouble since he got to town 3 months back. Sheriff hasn't been able to catch him at anything definite, but we all know he's bad news. The cowboy's expression hardened slightly. He won't forget this, ma'am. You embarrassed him pretty badly. Are you threatening me? Warning you. There's a difference. Mrs. Abernathy fluttered between them, wringing her hands. Oh, this is terrible. Miss Langford, you must come to the boarding house immediately. We'll get you cleaned up and settled. And Elias, she turned to the cowboy. Perhaps you should inform the sheriff about this incident. Already planning on it, Mrs. Abernathy. Elias, so that was his name, nodded respectfully to the older woman, then turned back to Beatrice. He held out his hand. Elias Morgan, ma'am. I run a ranch about 5 miles east of here. Beatrice looked at his extended hand, calloused and strong, then at his face. The presumption of it irritated her, as if surviving a robbery made them acquaintances, as if his approval of her kind of woman gave him some claim to familiarity. But her mother's training ran deep, and despite everything, she found herself extending her scraped, bloody hand to shake his. His grip was warm and firm, careful of her injuries. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through her, and she pulled back quickly. Beatrice Langford, she said stiffly. I'm the new school teacher. So I heard. He studied her for a moment longer, and she had the unsettling feeling he was seeing far more than she intended to show. Then he nodded once decisively. Welcome to Willow Creek, Miss Langford. I hope the town treats you better from here on out. He touched his hat brim again, a gesture that was becoming familiar, then swung back into his saddle with easy grace. The big gray horse responded immediately to his signals, and within moments, horse and rider were moving down the street toward what she assumed was the sheriff's office. Beatrice stood watching them go, aware of Mrs. Abernathy chattering beside her, aware of the dispersing crowd still shooting curious glances her way, aware of her torn dress and bleeding hands, and the precious purse still clutched against her chest. But mostly, she was aware of those pale blue eyes and that low, gravelly voice saying, "That's my kind of woman," and the strange, unsettled feeling the words had left in her chest. Mrs. Abernathy's respectable lodgings for ladies turned out to be a neat 2-story house with white clapboard siding and green shutters tucked on a quiet side street away from the saloons and rowdier establishments. A small porch wrapped around the front, furnished with 2 rocking chairs and a scattering of potted plants that struggled gamely against the harsh climate. Mrs. Abernathy kept up a steady stream of conversation as she ushered Beatrice inside, through a parlor furnished with mismatched but comfortable furniture, and up a narrow staircase to a small room under the eaves. Here we are, dear. It's not much, but it's clean and quiet. You'll share the washroom with Miss Patterson. She works at the dry goods store. And meals are served at 7 in the morning and 6 in the evening. No gentlemen callers above the first floor, and no alcohol on the premises. I run a respectable house. The room was indeed small, with space for a narrow bed, a washstand, a chest of drawers, and little else. But the window looked out over the mountains to the west, and the quilt on the bed showed signs of careful mending. It was clean, as promised, and it was hers. It's perfect, Beatrice said, and meant it. Mrs. Abernathy beamed. I'll fetch some hot water and bandages for those scrapes. You just rest a moment, dear. What a welcome to our little town. Though I must say, her eyes sparkled with barely suppressed excitement, you certainly made an impression, standing up to Jack Dockery like that. Why, the whole town will be talking about nothing else for weeks. That's exactly what I was hoping to avoid, Beatrice said dryly. Oh, you mustn't worry. It's good talk, admiring talk, especially from the ladies. We get so tired of feeling helpless out here, and Elias Morgan speaking up for you like that. Well, Mrs. Abernathy fanned herself dramatically. That man hardly says 2 words most days, but he knows quality when he sees it. Beatrice felt that unwelcome heat return to her face. Mr. Morgan and I are not... There's nothing. I just met the man. Of course, of course. Mrs. Abernathy's smile suggested she thought otherwise. Still, he's a good man, Miss Langford, one of the best. Came out here 7 years ago with nothing but a horse and determination, and built up the Morgan Ranch to one of the most successful operations in the county. He's fair to his men, honest in his dealings, and he's never once caused trouble in town. Plus, she added with a conspiratorial wink, he's easy on the eyes, don't you think? I didn't notice, Beatrice lied. Mrs. Abernathy laughed outright at that. Well, you might be the first woman in Willow Creek to manage that feat. I'll get that water now. She bustled out, leaving Beatrice alone in the small room. Beatrice set down her carpetbag and purse, then sank onto the edge of the bed. Now that the excitement had passed, exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. Her shoulder throbbed where the bandit had kicked her. Her palms stung. Every muscle ached from the struggle. But beneath the pain and fatigue, something else stirred, a fierce satisfaction. She'd fought for what was hers and won. She'd stood her ground in this harsh new world and proved she could survive it. The memory of Elias Morgan's voice echoed in her mind. That's my kind of woman. She should have been offended by the presumption, by the casual claim implied in those words. And part of her was. But another part, a part she didn't particularly want to examine, felt something warmer. Pride, maybe. Recognition. Beatrice stood and went to the window, looking out over the town. In the distance, mountains rose against the sky, their peaks still touched with snow despite the summer heat. The landscape was vast and empty and beautiful in a way that made her chest tight. This was her new home, her new life, and she'd be damned if she'd let one masked bandit or one presumptuous cowboy dictate how it unfolded. Mrs. Abernathy returned with hot water, bandages, and a bottle of carbolic acid for the wounds. As she cleaned and dressed Beatrice's scrapes, she continued her steady flow of information about the town and its inhabitants. Now, the schoolhouse is just 3 blocks west of here. You can't miss it. It's the only building in town with a bell tower, though the bell itself cracked 2 years ago and we haven't had funds to replace it. The previous teacher, Miss Thornton, left rather abruptly to marry a prospector who'd struck silver up in Leadville. Left us in quite a bind, I don't mind saying. We've been without a proper teacher for almost 4 months now. The children have been running wild, of course. Most of the families try to keep up with lessons at home, but farming and ranching don't leave much time for education. There are about 20 children of school age in town and the surrounding ranches, though you'll be lucky to see more than a dozen on any given day. The older boys especially, they're needed for work, and convincing their fathers to spare them even a few hours a week is like pulling teeth. What about the school board? Beatrice asked. Who will I be reporting to? Oh, we have a board, such as it is. Reverend Hutchins chairs it. He's a good man, though perhaps a bit old-fashioned in his views. Then there's Mayor Donovan, Mr. Chen, who runs the general store, and Mrs. Blackwood, the banker's wife. They'll want to meet with you tomorrow morning at the schoolhouse, I expect. Make sure you're suitable for the position. Mrs. Abernathy sniffed. As if fighting off a bandit didn't prove you're more than suitable. Beatrice smiled despite her fatigue. I hope they see it that way. They'd be fools not to. Now, you rest for a bit. Dinner is at 6, as I said. We're having beef stew, nothing fancy, but it's hearty. Miss Patterson will be there, and young Mr. Harding, who works at the bank. Respectable company. Mrs. Abernathy gathered up the soiled bandages and headed for the door, then paused. Oh, one more thing. The school board meets at 9 tomorrow morning. I'd suggest wearing your most conservative dress and pinning that hair up tight. Reverend Hutchins sets great store by proper appearance. After Mrs. Abernathy left, Beatrice unpacked her few belongings, wincing as her scraped palms protested the work. 2 more dresses, 1 dark green, 1 brown, both equally severe. A nightgown. Undergarments. A packet of letters from her sister that she probably wouldn't read. Her teaching certificate from the Boston Normal School. A daguerreotype of her parents, both dead now for 5 years. And at the bottom of the bag, wrapped carefully in cloth, 3 books. Shakespeare's sonnets, Whitman's Leaves of Grass, and a well-worn copy of Jane Eyre. Not exactly frontier reading, but they were the books she'd returned to again and again in her life. The ones that had shaped her understanding of what it meant to be fully human. She arranged them on the chest of drawers, a small gesture of claiming this space as her own. The afternoon stretched long and hot. Beatrice tried to rest, but her mind was too active, replaying the attack, analyzing what she could have done differently, wondering what tomorrow's meeting would bring. Finally, she gave up and went to the window, watching the life of the town unfold below. Wagons rumbled past. Children chased a dog down the street. A woman in a faded dress swept the boardwalk in front of what looked like a dress shop. Ordinary life, the same in its essentials as any small town back east, but with a rough edge that Boston had long since smoothed away. She found herself scanning the street for a tall figure on a gray horse, and caught herself with irritation. What did it matter where Elias Morgan was or what he was doing? He was nothing to her, a stranger who'd witnessed an embarrassing incident, nothing more. But her mind kept circling back to the way he'd looked at her, not with pity or shock or disapproval, but with something that might have been respect. And that low voice, "That's my kind of woman." What kind of woman was that exactly? The kind who fought for what was hers? The kind who didn't know when to let go? The kind who was too stubborn to accept help even when it was offered? Beatrice shook her head, annoyed at herself. It didn't matter. She was here to teach, to build a new life on her own terms. Romance, if that's what her body's unwelcome reaction had been, wasn't part of the plan. She'd seen too many capable women lose themselves in marriage, subsume their dreams and ambitions to their husband's needs. She would not be that woman. Oh, dinner at Mrs. Abernathy's table was a surprisingly pleasant affair. Miss Patterson turned out to be a cheerful young woman of about 25, with red hair and a spattering of freckles across her nose. Mr. Harding was older, perhaps 40, thin and nervous with ink-stained fingers and a tendency to stutter when directly addressed. The beef stew was indeed hearty, and Mrs. Abernathy kept the conversation flowing with practiced ease, steering away from any mention of the afternoon's excitement. Instead, they discussed the upcoming church social, the new catalog that had arrived at the general store, and whether the railroad might extend its line further west. After dinner, Beatrice excused herself and returned to her room. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and pink that took her breath away. She stood at the window watching until the colors faded to purple and the first stars appeared. Tomorrow, she would meet the school board. Tomorrow, her new life would truly begin. But tonight, as she prepared for bed, washing carefully around her bandaged scrapes, she allowed herself one moment of honesty. She touched her fingers to her lips, remembering the jolt that had run through her when Elias Morgan's hand had closed around hers. "That's my kind of woman." Beatrice Langford fell asleep with those words echoing in her mind, and dreamed of vast skies and pale blue eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. The morning of the school board meeting dawned clear and bright. Beatrice dressed with particular care in her green dress, the most conservative of her limited wardrobe, and pinned her dark hair into a severe bun at the nape of her neck. Her reflection in the small mirror showed a respectable, competent woman, exactly the image she wanted to project. The scrapes on her palms had scabbed over during the night, and while her shoulder was stiff and sore, it was nothing that would impair her ability to teach. She flexed her fingers experimentally, then picked up her reticule and teaching certificate. Mrs. Abernathy had breakfast waiting, eggs and toast and strong coffee that drove away the last cobwebs of sleep. "You look perfect, dear," Mrs. Abernathy pronounced. "Very professional. Though you might want to wear gloves to hide those scrapes. Some people might think them unladylike." Beatrice had brought one pair of good gloves, saved for special occasions. She slipped them on, wincing slightly as the fabric pressed against her healing palms. A small price to pay for respectability. The schoolhouse was easy to find, just as Mrs. Abernathy had promised. It stood at the edge of town, a simple wooden structure with the promised bell tower rising above. Someone had painted it white once, but the color had faded and peeled under the relentless sun. A small yard surrounded the building, currently overrun with prairie grass and wildflowers. Beatrice arrived 10 minutes early, as was proper, and found the door standing open. Inside, the single room was larger than she'd expected, with rough wooden benches arranged in rows facing a battered desk. A chalkboard hung on the front wall, cracked but serviceable. Windows on both sides let in the morning light. 4 people waited for her, arranged in a semicircle of chairs near the front. The eldest was clearly Reverend Hutchins, a tall, spare man with white hair and the stern expression of someone who'd spent his life wrestling with sin and finding it disappointingly prevalent. He wore a black suit that had seen better days, and his collar was so stiff it looked uncomfortable. Beside him sat a jovial-looking man with mutton-chop whiskers and a substantial belly straining against his vest buttons. Mayor Donovan, she presumed. Next to him was a Chinese man of middle years, dressed Western style, but with a long queue down his back. Mr. Chen from the general store. And completing the group was a woman perhaps 10 years older than Beatrice, dressed in expensive silk that seemed wildly out of place in the rough schoolhouse. Mrs. Blackwood, presumably. All four turned as Beatrice entered, and she saw their expressions shift as they took in her bandaged hands and the fading bruise on her cheekbone she'd tried to cover with rice powder. "Miss Langford," Reverend Hutchins said, rising. His voice was deep and resonant, used to carrying across a congregation. "We are pleased you arrived safely, despite yesterday's incident." "Thank you, Reverend. I apologize for the dramatic introduction to your community." "Not at all, not at all," Mayor Donovan boomed, also rising. "Showed real grit, you did. The whole town's talking about it. That new teacher's got backbone, they're saying. Good for morale, having someone stand up to thugs like Dockery." Mrs. Blackwood cleared her throat delicately. "While we certainly appreciate your courage, Miss Langford, we do hope such incidents won't become a regular occurrence. The school board takes very seriously our responsibility for the moral and physical safety of our students." There was a subtle emphasis on the word moral that set Beatrice's teeth on edge, but she kept her expression neutral. "I assure you, Mrs. Blackwood, I have no intention of encouraging violence of any kind. Yesterday was an unfortunate and unexpected situation." Mr. Chen, who hadn't yet spoken, gestured to an empty chair. "Please sit. We have questions." The next hour was an exhausting exercise in proving her competence and respectability. Reverend Hutchins interrogated her about her religious views, Congregationalist, acceptable, if not ideal. Mayor Donovan wanted to know her views on discipline, firm but fair, she assured him. Mrs. Blackwood probed delicately into her background, Boston family, good education, no scandal. She left out the part about being an unmarriageable spinster. Mr. Chen, surprisingly, asked the most practical questions about curriculum and her experience with children of varying ages and abilities. Throughout it all, Beatrice kept her answers measured and professional, revealing nothing of her inner fire or her more progressive educational theories. These could be introduced gradually, once she'd proven herself indispensable. Finally, Reverend Hutchins folded his hands and fixed her with a penetrating stare. "Miss Langford, you come highly recommended, and your credentials are impressive. However, we must be frank. Willow Creek is a rough town, still finding its way toward civilization. We need a teacher who will not only educate our children in reading and arithmetic, but who will serve as a moral example. A woman of unimpeachable character and behavior. Can you be that woman?" Beatrice met his gaze steadily. "I can, Reverend. I take my responsibilities seriously, both as an educator and as a member of any community I join." "You're unmarried." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "Yes." "You're also 32 years old, by your own admission, somewhat mature for a single woman." Mrs. Blackwood's tone made it clear this was not a compliment. "I've dedicated my life to education," Beatrice said evenly. "I had opportunities for marriage, but I chose my vocation instead." "And you're not, that is to say, you don't hold any radical views about women's rights or other such modern notions?" Mrs. Blackwood leaned forward slightly. "We've heard disturbing reports from back east about women demanding the vote and other inappropriate political involvement." Ah, here was the real test. Beatrice chose her words carefully. "I believe that women have a vital role to play in civilizing society through education and moral example. As for politics, I leave such matters to those with more knowledge of public affairs than myself." It was a careful non-answer that seemed to satisfy Mrs. Blackwood, though Beatrice felt a twinge of guilt at the evasion. She did believe women should have the vote, passionately, but she also believed that children deserved education, and if she had to keep her more progressive views quiet in order to provide that education, so be it. "Well," Mayor Donovan said, slapping his thighs decisively, "I think Miss Langford here is exactly what we need. Shows courage, knows her books, and she's already famous in town. Why, half the families will send their children just to meet the lady who fought off Jack Dockery." "I concur," Mr. Chen said quietly. "We need teacher. Miss Langford is qualified. She should start soon. Reverend Hutchins looked less convinced, but finally nodded. Very well. Miss Langford, welcome to Willow Creek School. You'll begin on Monday. That gives you 4 days to prepare the classroom and familiarize yourself with the materials we have available. Your salary will be $30 per month, paid quarterly. Mrs. Abernathy's lodging will be paid separately by the town. Are these terms acceptable? Perfectly acceptable. Thank you. Mrs. Blackwood stood, smoothing her silk skirts. I'll have my daughter Emily attend starting Monday. She's 11 and quite advanced for her age. I trust you'll be able to challenge her appropriately. I'll do my best, Beatrice said, recognizing the subtext. Mrs. Blackwood expected special treatment for her daughter. After the board members left, Beatrice stood alone in the schoolhouse, looking around at what would become her domain. $30 a month wasn't much, barely more than she'd made tutoring in Boston, but it was hers, earned by her own labor. And this room, shabby as it was, represented possibility. She spent the rest of the morning exploring her new workplace. The desk drawers yielded a few pieces of chalk, some badly worn slates, a collection of primers in various stages of decay, and a copy of McGuffey's Reader so ancient it might have been used in the original 13 colonies. A locked cupboard presumably held additional supplies, but she didn't have the key yet. The schoolhouse had its own well in the yard, and a small shed that served as an outhouse. Rough, but functional. Beatrice was making a mental list of supplies she'd need when she heard boots on the wooden steps outside. She turned, expecting perhaps Mayor Donovan or Mr. Chen with the key to the supply cupboard. Instead, Elias Morgan filled the doorway. He'd taken his hat off, and she could see his dark hair was longer than was fashionable, curling slightly at his collar. In the clear morning light, his weathered face seemed younger than she'd first thought, probably no more than 35. He held his hat in one hand and a bundle wrapped in cloth in the other. "Mr. Morgan," Beatrice said, annoyed at the way her pulse had quickened. "I'm surprised to see you. Don't you have a ranch to run?" "Got men for that." He stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the dimmer interior. "Heard you met with the school board this morning. Figured you might need some practical supplies they forgot to mention." He set the bundle on her desk and unwrapped it to reveal a collection of items. A good piece of chalk, not the broken stubs she'd found in the drawer. A sturdy leather strap, for discipline, she realized with a slight grimace. A handful of pencils, and a small leather-bound book. "That's a roll book," he said, noticing her gaze. "For attendance. The last teacher never kept one, but it might be useful for you, especially with the ranch families. Helps track which children are coming regularly and which ones are being kept home for work." Beatrice picked up the book, running her gloved fingers over the smooth leather. It was a thoughtful gift, practical and well considered. "Thank you," she said, and was surprised to find she meant it sincerely. "This is kind of you, Mr. Morgan." "Elias." He shifted his weight slightly, suddenly seeming less comfortable. "And it's not just kindness. I have a vested interest in the school." "Oh?" Beatrice raised an eyebrow. "Do you have children I should know about?" "No. No wife, no children." He said it simply, stating facts. "But I employ 15 men at the ranch, and most of them can't read. I can teach them basic arithmetic for ranch accounts, but reading and writing, that's beyond me. Was hoping maybe you'd consider evening classes for adults. I'd pay for materials, and I'd make sure my men attended." It was an unexpected proposal, and an intriguing one. Beatrice set down the roll book and studied him more carefully. "You read and write," she observed. "Your note to Mrs. Abernathy arranging these supplies was well written." "Wasn't always that way." Elias looked past her, out the window toward the mountains. "Grew up poor as dirt in Missouri. My pa was a sharecropper, couldn't read a word. Figured I'd follow the same path. But when I was about 12, there was a teacher came through, young man, fresh from some college back east. He'd sit up under a tree every afternoon and teach anyone who'd sit still long enough. Most folks weren't interested, but I was." His voice had taken on a reflective quality, remembering. "Changed my life, learning to read. Suddenly I could understand contracts, keep proper accounts, read about places I'd never been. That teacher stayed maybe 3 months before moving on, but he gave me tools I've used every day since. Figured I owe him a debt I can't repay, but maybe I can pass it forward. Help my men get the same chance I did." Beatrice felt something shift in her chest, a softening she hadn't anticipated. Here was a man who understood what she understood, that education wasn't just about memorizing facts, but about opening doors, expanding possibilities, fundamentally changing what a life could be. "I'd be happy to offer evening classes," she said quietly, "though I'll need to establish the day school first, make sure I'm meeting the board's expectations. Perhaps in a few weeks?" "That'd be fine." Elias turned back to her, and their eyes met. The pale blue of his gaze seemed to see more than she wanted to reveal. "I also came to warn you. Jack Dockery's been shooting his mouth off at the Silver Dollar, saying you made him look like a fool, saying you'll regret it. Sheriff talked to him, but there's not much he can do without an actual crime being committed." Beatrice felt a chill despite the warm morning air. "Is he likely to try something?" "Hard to say. Dockery's a bully and a thief, but I don't know if he's violent beyond that. Still, might be wise to take precautions. Don't walk alone after dark. Vary your routes to and from the schoolhouse, and—" He hesitated, then reached behind his back and pulled out a small pistol, which he set on her desk. "Consider learning to use this." Beatrice stared at the gun. It was small, designed for a woman's hand, with an elegant pearl handle that seemed at odds with its deadly purpose. I don't know how to shoot." "I could teach you." Elias said it simply, as if offering to teach her to ride a horse or play checkers. "Sunday afternoon, if you're willing. My ranch isn't far. You could ride out. I'd give you a few lessons, have you back to town before dark. Mrs. Abernathy could chaperone if you're worried about propriety." It was a reasonable offer, practical even, but Beatrice heard the echo of Mrs. Blackwood's questions about her character, felt the weight of the school board's expectations. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Morgan, Elias, but I think it would be unwise. I'm new here, and I need to establish my reputation as a sober, respectable woman. Being seen riding out to a bachelor's ranch, even with a chaperone, would undermine that." Something flickered across his face. Disappointment, maybe, or frustration. But he nodded. "Fair enough, but take the gun anyway. Keep it in your desk drawer at school and in your room at night, just in case. I wouldn't know how to use it even if I wanted to. It's simple. Point and pull the trigger. At close range, you don't even need to aim well." He demonstrated with empty hands, his movements practiced and efficient. "Safety's here. Keep it on unless you're actually intending to shoot. It holds 6 rounds. I'll leave extra ammunition." He produced a small box of bullets from his vest pocket and set them beside the gun. Then he stepped back, giving her space. "Your choice, Miss Langford. But out here, being practical often matters more than being proper. Something to think about." With that, he settled his hat back on his head, tipped it to her in that now familiar gesture, and walked out of the schoolhouse. Beatrice stood for a long moment, staring at the gun on her desk. Everything in her Boston upbringing recoiled from it. Nice women didn't handle weapons, didn't prepare for violence, didn't acknowledge the brutality that lurked beneath civilization's thin veneer. But she wasn't in Boston anymore. Finally, carefully, she picked up the pistol. It was heavier than she'd expected, cold metal warming slowly under her gloved hands. She found the safety mechanism Elias had indicated and made sure it was engaged, then placed the gun in the bottom drawer of her desk, covering it with some old papers. Out of sight, but accessible. Respectable, but practical. Just like she would have to be, she thought, if she was going to survive out here. The rest of the day passed in a blur of practical tasks, taking inventory of the few books and supplies available, planning her first week's lessons, scrubbing the worst of the grime from the windows and desks. By the time the sun started its descent toward the mountains, Beatrice was exhausted, dusty, and oddly satisfied. She locked the schoolhouse door behind her. The key had been delivered by Mr. Chen in the afternoon, along with a slate of information about which children to expect, and started back toward Mrs. Abernathy's. The street was quieter now, the afternoon heat driving most people indoors. Beatrice walked slowly, savoring the relatively cool air, watching the long shadows stretch across the dusty road. She was almost to the boarding house when she heard the voice. "Well, well, if it ain't the biting lady." Beatrice stopped, her heart suddenly pounding. Jack Dockery leaned against the wall of the dress shop, his arms crossed over his chest. In the slanting light, she could see his face clearly for the first time, thin and sharp-featured, with mean little eyes and a weak chin. The kind of man who needed to prey on others to feel strong. Mr. Dockery, she said evenly, keeping her voice calm despite her racing pulse. I have nothing to say to you. That's real unfriendly. He pushed off from the wall and took a step toward her. Especially since you owe me an apology. I owe you nothing. See, that's where you're wrong. Another step. He was close enough now that she could smell the whiskey on his breath, see the yellowed teeth behind his sneer. You embarrassed me in front of the whole town. Made me look weak. Can't let that stand, can I? Beatrice's mind raced. The street was empty. Where was everyone? Should she scream? Run? Her hand moved instinctively toward her reticule, but the gun was back at the schoolhouse, useless. The sheriff knows about yesterday, she said, trying to sound confident. If anything happens to me, you'll be the first person he suspects. Dockery laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Sheriff can suspect all he wants. Can't prove nothing without evidence, can he? And accidents happen all the time out here. Horses bolt. People fall. Sad. But that's frontier life. He was close enough to touch her now, and Beatrice felt her body go cold with fear and rage. Not again. She would not be a victim again. Step back, she said, her voice low and hard. Now. Or what? You gonna bite me again? He reached out and she saw his hand moving toward her arm. The voice that interrupted was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute certainty. Touch her, and you'll lose that hand. Beatrice turned to see Elias Morgan standing at the corner of the building, not 10 feet away. He wasn't holding a weapon, wasn't even in a particularly aggressive stance. But something in his posture, in the ice-cold calm of his expression, screamed danger. Dockery's hand dropped. This ain't your business, Morgan. I'm making it my business. Elias walked forward with that same unhurried grace she'd noticed before, but now it seemed predatory, deliberate. Miss Langford is under my protection. Anyone bothering her is bothering me. You understand what I'm saying, Jack? You can't protect her all the time. But Dockery was backing up, his bravado crumbling. Don't need to protect her all the time. Just need to make sure you understand the consequences of trying something. Elias stopped a few feet away, and Beatrice saw Dockery flinch. You know my reputation, Jack. You know I don't make threats I won't keep. So here's how this goes. You stay away from Miss Langford. You don't talk to her. Don't look at her. Don't even think about her. You do that, we'll have no problems. But if I hear you've so much as breathed in her direction, he let the sentence hang, unfinished and more threatening for it. Dockery's face worked through several expressions: anger, fear, calculation. Finally, he spat in the dust at their feet and stalked away, his shoulders hunched with impotent rage. Elias watched him go, his expression never changing. Only when Dockery had turned the corner and disappeared from sight did he turn to Beatrice. You all right? Beatrice found she was shaking, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. Yes. Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't. Don't think about it. His voice had softened, returned to that low, gravelly warmth. Come on. I'll walk you back to Mrs. Abernathy's. They walked in silence for a while, Beatrice trying to get her breathing under control, Elias simply present beside her. His nearness was oddly comforting, solid and real in a way that steadied her. How did you happen to be there? She finally asked. Wasn't happenstance. I've been keeping an eye out, making sure Dockery didn't try something stupid. He glanced at her. Didn't mean to hover, but I figured you'd rather have me there than not. I would have rather not needed rescuing at all. Yes, ma'am, but needing help and accepting it aren't weaknesses, just facts of life out here. They'd reached the boarding house. Beatrice stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and turned to face him. In the fading light, his eyes looked almost silver. Thank you, Elias, truly. You're welcome. He started to turn away, then stopped. Miss Langford, Beatrice, I meant what I said about teaching you to shoot. Not saying you need to come to my ranch if you're worried about talk, but maybe there's somewhere closer, somewhere more public. The sheriff might have a place we could use, worth thinking about. Beatrice looked at him, this weathered cowboy who read books and valued education, who twice now appeared when she needed help, who seemed to understand the balance between independence and practicality she was trying to strike. Yes, she heard herself say, it's worth thinking about. His smile was slow but genuine, transforming his serious face into something warmer, more open. Good. Get some rest. Monday's coming, and those children are going to test you hard. They always do with a new teacher. He tipped his hat one more time and walked away into the gathering dusk, his long stride eating up the distance. Beatrice stood watching until he disappeared, her heart still racing but no longer from fear. "That's my kind of woman," he'd said. And God help her, she was starting to wonder if he might be her kind of man. Mrs. Abernathy was waiting in the parlor when Beatrice came through the door, her face creased with concern that smoothed into relief the moment she saw her boarder was unharmed. "Oh, thank goodness! Mr. Patterson from the barber shop came running over to say there'd been words between you and that Dockery fellow on the street. I was about to send for the sheriff." "It's all right," Beatrice assured her, though her hands were still trembling slightly. "Mr. Morgan intervened before anything could happen." Elias Morgan. Mrs. Abernathy's expression shifted into something knowing and pleased. "That man has been hovering around you like a mother hen with one chick. Don't think I haven't noticed." "He's simply being neighborly." "Neighborly?" Mrs. Abernathy laughed softly. "Dear, I've known Elias Morgan for 7 years, and I've never seen him be neighborly to anyone except his horses and his ranch hands. If he's taking an interest in your welfare, it means something." Beatrice felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Mrs. Abernathy, I'm here to teach, not to entangle myself in romantic complications." "Who said anything about complications? Sometimes the best things in life are the simplest. A good man, a shared purpose, a little affection. Nothing complicated about that." The older woman patted Beatrice's arm. "But I won't push. You've had a long day. Dinner will be ready in an hour. Why don't you rest?" Beatrice climbed the stairs to her small room, grateful for the solitude. She sank onto the bed, her mind churning through the day's events. The school board meeting with its careful interrogation, the dusty schoolhouse that would become her domain, the gun hidden in her desk drawer. And Elias Morgan, appearing twice now at exactly the right moment, his quiet strength both reassuring and unsettling. She'd come west to escape the confines of her old life, to prove she could stand alone. The last thing she needed was to develop feelings for a cowboy who already seemed to think she needed protecting. And yet, that night, Beatrice lay awake long after the house had gone quiet, staring at the ceiling and trying not to think about pale blue eyes and calloused hands, and a voice that said her name like it meant something. Sunday morning arrived with church bells calling the faithful to worship. Beatrice dressed in her brown dress, pinned her hair with extra care, and walked to the white clapboard church at the edge of town with Mrs. Abernathy and the other boarders. The interior was simple but well-maintained, with wooden pews worn smooth by years of use and windows that let in streams of golden light. Reverend Hutchins presided from a pulpit that seemed designed to make him tower over his congregation, his voice rolling out in sonorous waves as he preached about the dangers of pride and the virtues of humility. Beatrice found herself scanning the pews, looking for a familiar tall figure, and caught herself with annoyance. It was none of her business whether Elias Morgan attended church or not. But as the service progressed and the congregation rose for hymns, she couldn't help but notice his absence. In a town this small, everyone knew everyone. His empty pew would be remarked upon. After the service, the churchyard became a social gathering place. Women clustered in groups, exchanging news and recipes. Men stood in looser circles, discussing cattle prices and weather. Children raced between the adults, their Sunday clothes already showing signs of wear. Beatrice found herself surrounded almost immediately by curious townspeople eager to meet the new teacher. A succession of mothers introduced their children, shy little Emma Chen, who clutched her mother's skirts and peeked out with enormous dark eyes. Boisterous Tommy Fitzgerald, who couldn't have been more than 6 and already had the look of a future troublemaker. Sarah and Samuel Kowalski, Polish twins with matching blonde braids and serious expressions. "And this is my Billy," said a tired-looking woman with work-roughened hands and a faded calico dress. "Billy Jenkins. He's 12, and well, he can be a handful. I hope you'll be patient with him, Miss Langford." The boy standing beside her was tall for his age, gangly in that awkward stage between child and man. He had dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes that held both intelligence and defiance. When he looked at Beatrice, There was challenge in his gaze, as if daring her to try to control him. "I'm sure Billy and I will get along fine," Beatrice said evenly, meeting his stare without flinching. "I find that students do best when they're treated with respect and given interesting work to do." "Billy's had trouble with teachers before," Mrs. Jenkins said apologetically. "He's smart, but he gets bored easy, and then he causes mischief." "Then I'll have to make sure he doesn't get bored." Beatrice smiled at the boy. "Do you like to read, Billy?" The question seemed to surprise him. "Sometimes, when it's not boring stuff." "What do you consider boring?" "Primers, baby books, stuff I already know." His chin jutted forward defensively. "I can read better than most adults in this town." "Good. Then we'll find you something more challenging. Do you know Shakespeare?" Billy's eyes widened slightly. "The play guy? Romeo and Juliet and all that?" "Among others, perhaps we could read Hamlet together. It's got sword fights and ghosts and revenge. Not boring at all." For the first time, something like interest flickered across Billy's face. "Really?" "Really. I'll expect you in school Monday morning, 9 o'clock sharp." Mrs. Jenkins looked like she might cry with relief. "Thank you, Miss Langford, truly. He's a good boy, just spirited." After the Jenkins moved on, Beatrice found herself approached by Mrs. Blackwood, resplendent in a dress that probably cost more than Beatrice's entire wardrobe. At her side was a girl of about 11 with perfect blonde ringlets and a pinched, superior expression. "Miss Langford, this is my daughter Emily. Emily, make your curtsy to your new teacher." Emily's curtsy was technically perfect, but utterly without warmth. "How do you do, Miss Langford?" "Very well, thank you, Emily. I look forward to having you in class." "Mother says you studied at the Boston Normal School. Is that true?" "It is." "Mother also says you fought a bandit in the street like a common brawler." Emily's tone made it clear this was not meant as a compliment. "Emily!" Mrs. Blackwood's face flushed. "That's not what I said at all. I merely mentioned that Miss Langford had shown unexpected courage in defending her property." Beatrice kept her smile in place with effort. "I did what was necessary, Emily. Sometimes life requires us to be stronger than we thought we could be." "A lady should never have to resort to violence," Emily said primly, clearly parroting something she'd heard at home. "A lady should be refined and delicate. A lady should be capable of meeting whatever challenges life presents," Beatrice countered gently. "Refinement and strength aren't mutually exclusive." Mrs. Blackwood looked like she wanted to argue, but Mayor Donovan chose that moment to boom across the churchyard. "Miss Langford, got someone here wants to meet you." Beatrice excused herself gratefully and made her way over to where the mayor stood with a lean, weathered man who looked to be in his 60s. He had the bow-legged stance of someone who'd spent his life on horseback, and his face was creased with so many wrinkles it was hard to tell where one ended and another began. "This here's Pete Hawkins," Mayor Donovan said. "Runs a small ranch about 8 miles north. Got 3 young ones who'll be coming to your school." Pete Hawkins tipped his hat. "Pleasure, ma'am. My Martha, that's my wife. She's powerful excited about having a real teacher again. Our kids been doing their lessons at home, but Martha's got her hands full with the baby and the ranch work. She'll be glad to have someone else take over the teaching." "How old are your children, Mr. Hawkins?" "Jesse's 10, Annabelle's 8, and Lucas is 6. They're good kids, mostly. Jesse can be stubborn, but he's got a good heart. Annabelle's the reader. That girl would live in a book if we let her, and Lucas is still learning his letters." "They sound wonderful. Will they be able to attend regularly?" Pete scratched his jaw. "That's the rub, ain't it? Ranch work don't stop for school. I'll do my best to spare 'em most days, but there'll be times, branding season, harvest, if we got sick animals, when I'll need 'em home. Hope that won't be a problem." It was the reality of frontier teaching, Beatrice knew. Children here weren't decorative creatures to be refined and educated. They were necessary labor, contributors to their family's survival. She'd have to work around the rhythms of ranch and farm life if she wanted to reach them at all. "I understand, Mr. Hawkins. We'll make it work. Perhaps on the days they can't attend, I could send lessons home with them. That way they won't fall too far behind." The old rancher's face brightened. "That'd be mighty kind of you, Miss Langford. Mighty kind indeed." The conversations continued, a parade of parents and children each with their own hopes and concerns. Beatrice met them all, making mental notes, beginning to build a picture of the community she'd be serving. What she didn't meet, she noticed, was Elias Morgan. Later, as the crowd began to disperse and families headed home for Sunday dinner, Beatrice found herself standing with Mrs. Abernathy in the shade of a cottonwood tree. "You handled that well," the older woman said approvingly. "Parents can be more challenging than children sometimes. They're protective. It's understandable." Beatrice watched the last few families climb into wagons and head out of town. "Mrs. Abernathy, may I ask you something?" "Of course, dear." "Mr. Morgan, Elias, does he attend church?" Mrs. Abernathy's expression became thoughtful. "Sometimes, not as regularly as Reverend Hutchins would like, but Elias has his own relationship with the Almighty, I think. He works hard all week, and Sunday's often his only day to catch up on ranch business. Plus," she hesitated, then continued, "I don't think he feels entirely comfortable in the Reverend's congregation." "Why not?" "Reverend Hutchins is a good man, but he's old-fashioned in his views. Very concerned with social hierarchies, proper behavior, knowing one's place. Elias doesn't fit neatly into any category. He's not educated in the formal sense, but he's widely read. He's not wealthy, but he's successful. He treats his ranch hands, including the Mexican and Chinese workers, like human beings worthy of respect, which some folks find unusual." Mrs. Abernathy sighed. The reverends preached more than one sermon about the proper order of society that seemed aimed directly at Elias's practices. Beatrice felt something shift in her understanding of the man. He hires Chinese and Mexican workers? He hires whoever can do the job well and treats them all the same. Pays fair wages, provides decent housing, doesn't tolerate abuse. Revolutionary concepts, apparently. Mrs. Abernathy's tone was dry. It's one reason his ranch does so well. Good workers stay when they're treated with dignity, but it's also why some of the better families in town look at him sideways. "I see. Do you?" Mrs. Abernathy studied her. "Because if you're thinking of accepting his attentions, you should know it might complicate your position. The school board values propriety above almost everything else. Association with someone who challenges social conventions could be problematic." Beatrice felt a flash of irritation. "I'm not accepting his attentions. We barely know each other." "Yet," Mrs. Abernathy smiled. "Come along, dear. Sunday dinner won't cook itself." Monday morning dawned clear and bright, and Beatrice woke with her stomach tied in knots. First day of school, first real test of whether she could handle this life she'd chosen. She dressed with care in her green dress, pinned her hair severely, and ate breakfast without tasting a bite. Mrs. Abernathy packed her a lunch basket and wished her luck with a knowing smile that did nothing to calm her nerves. The walk to the schoolhouse felt both too short and too long. With every step, Beatrice rehearsed her opening remarks, mentally reviewed her lesson plans, wondered if she'd prepared enough or too much, or entirely the wrong things. She arrived to find a handful of children already waiting in the yard, running and playing in the early morning coolness. They stopped when they saw her, sudden silence falling as they stared at the stranger who would be their teacher. Beatrice straightened her shoulders and walked up the steps. "Good morning," she called out, her voice carrying across the yard. "I'm Miss Langford, and I'm pleased to meet all of you. Classes begin at 9 o'clock. Please be inside and seated by then." She unlocked the door and went inside, setting her basket on the desk and taking a moment to steady her breathing. Through the window, she could see more children arriving, some walking from town, others being dropped off by parents in wagons. At precisely 9 o'clock, she walked to the door and rang the small handbell she'd found in the supply cupboard. The children filed in, some curious, some apprehensive, some openly defiant. She counted 14 in total. Not the full 20 Mrs. Abernathy had mentioned, but a respectable start. They ranged in age from little Lucas Hawkins, who looked small and lost in the front row, to Billy Jenkins in the back, his long legs stretched out and his arms crossed in a posture of calculated boredom. Beatrice stood before them, these children of the frontier, and felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. They'd been without a teacher for months. Some had probably given up hope of ever getting a real education. Others were here only because their parents forced them to attend. It was her job to change that, to make them care about learning, about books, about ideas, to show them that education could be more than drudgery. It could be magic. "Good morning," she said again, and this time her voice was steady, confident. "Welcome to Willow Creek School. My name is Miss Beatrice Langford, and I'm honored to be your teacher. Before we begin, I'd like each of you to stand, tell me your name, your age, and one thing you'd like to learn this year. We'll start in the front row." Little Emma Chen stood first, so small she barely reached the top of the desk. "My name is Emma Chen. I'm 7. I want to learn to read better." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but Beatrice smiled at her encouragingly. "Excellent, Emma. Reading better is a wonderful goal." They went around the room. Tommy Fitzgerald wanted to learn about dinosaurs. The Kowalski twins wanted to learn to write letters to their grandmother in Poland. Annabelle Hawkins wanted to read every book in the schoolhouse. Emily Blackwood wanted to learn French, delivered with a pointed look that suggested she doubted Beatrice was capable of teaching it. When they reached Billy Jenkins in the back row, he stood slowly, deliberately, taking his time. Billy Jenkins. 12. "I want to learn something that's actually useful, not just baby stuff." Several children giggled. Beatrice met his challenging stare calmly. "What do you consider useful, Billy?" He seemed surprised by the question. "I don't know, real things. How the world works. Not just reading primers and doing sums." "Fair enough. This year, among other things, we'll study natural science, geography, history, literature, mathematics, and composition. We'll read Shakespeare, as I promised. We'll learn about the solar system, the human body, the history of civilizations. We'll write essays about topics that matter to you. We'll have debates about important questions. Does that sound useful?" Billy's expression shifted from defiance to cautious interest. "I guess so." "Good. Please be seated." She'd won the first small battle. Billy Jenkins had come prepared to hate her, to test her, to force her to throw him out so he could quit school with honor. Instead, she'd listened to him, taken him seriously, promised him challenge rather than condemnation. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was a start. The morning passed in a blur of assessment and organization. Beatrice had the children read aloud so she could gauge their abilities, had them solve arithmetic problems, had them write a short paragraph about their summer. The range of skills was staggering. Emma Chen could barely read simple words, while Billy Jenkins was working through a book of poetry he'd brought from home. Some children formed their letters with painstaking care. Others scrawled illegibly. She'd have to teach them as individuals, not as a uniform mass. It would be exhausting, but it was the only way to reach them all. At noon, she dismissed them for lunch. Most of the children produced parcels of food from home and scattered around the yard to eat. Beatrice sat at her desk, eating the sandwiches Mrs. Abernathy had packed, and tried not to feel overwhelmed by the task before her. She was reviewing her afternoon lesson plans when a shadow fell across her desk. She looked up to find Billy Jenkins standing there, his expression uncertain. "Miss Langford, can I ask you something?" "Of course, Billy." "Did you really bite that bandit, like everyone's saying?" So much for keeping her reputation untarnished. "Yes, I did." "Why?" It was a fair question. Beatrice set down her sandwich and considered her answer carefully. "Because he was trying to take something that belonged to me, and I wasn't willing to let him have it without a fight. Sometimes, Billy, standing up for yourself means doing things that aren't pretty or proper. It means fighting back even when you're scared, even when you might lose." Billy nodded slowly, absorbing this. "My pa says women shouldn't fight, says it's unnatural." "What do you think?" The question clearly surprised him. I think maybe women should be able to fight if they need to. Seems wrong that only men get to defend themselves." "I agree. And I think men and women both should fight for things that matter. Their property, their families, their dignity, their right to an education." She held his gaze. "You're smart, Billy. Smart enough to think for yourself, to question what you're told, to form your own opinions. That's a gift, but it's also a responsibility. Being smart means you have to work even harder, learn even more, challenge yourself even when it's uncomfortable." "Is that why you came out here? To challenge yourself?" Perceptive boy. "Partly. I came here because I believed I could make a difference. Because I wanted to help children like you reach their full potential. and because I wanted to prove to myself that I was brave enough to build a new life. Are you scared? Terrified, Beatrice admitted. Every day. But being scared doesn't mean you stop trying. It just means you have to try harder. Billy thought about this for a long moment. Then he nodded once, decisively, and walked back outside to finish his lunch. Beatrice watched him go, feeling like she'd just passed some crucial test she hadn't known she was taking. The afternoon brought grammar lessons and a geography exercise that had the children locating Colorado on a map of the United States, then trying to find where their families had come from. Tommy Fitzgerald's people were from Ireland, the Kowalskis from Poland, Emma Chen's parents from China. They traced imaginary journeys across oceans and continents, and Beatrice saw their eyes widen as they grasped the distances involved, the courage it had taken their parents and grandparents to come so far. You're all pioneers, she told them as the afternoon wound down. Every single one of you. You're building something new here, creating a community where different people from different places can live together and learn together. That's not easy. But it's important. It's worth doing well. At 3 o'clock, she dismissed them. The children scattered like dandelion seeds, running toward town or waiting for parents to collect them. Within minutes, the schoolhouse was empty except for Beatrice, alone amid the evidence of her first day. Chalk dust on her dress, papers scattered across her desk, the lingering energy of 14 young minds engaging with ideas. She'd done it. She'd survived her first day. Beatrice was gathering her things, preparing to lock up and head back to Mrs. Abernathy's, when she heard boots on the steps outside. Her hand moved instinctively toward the desk drawer where the gun lay hidden, then relaxed as Elias Morgan's familiar figure appeared in the doorway. He held his hat in his hands, and his expression was almost nervous. That seemed wrong for a man who always appeared so confident. "Elias," she said, surprised, "what are you doing here?" "Wanted to see how your first day went. Figured you might need a friendly face." He glanced around the room. "Looks like a tornado hit." 14 children will do that. Beatrice found herself smiling despite her exhaustion. "It went well, I think. At least no one threw anything or set anything on fire, which I'm told is a good sign." "Billy Jenkins show up?" "He did. How did you know he'd be a concern?" "Billy's bright but bored. He's run off 3 teachers in 2 years with his pranks and attitude, last one left in tears." Elias stepped further into the room, his eyes scanning the chalkboard where Beatrice had written vocabulary words. "Looks like you got him interested, though. Saw him walking home with a book under his arm, actually reading it instead of causing trouble. He needs to be challenged. Most bright children do." Beatrice straightened the papers on her desk, very aware of Elias's presence in her space. The room suddenly felt smaller, more intimate. "Was there something specific you needed, or did you really come just to check on me?" "Actually, I came to make an offer about the shooting lessons." Beatrice felt her heart skip. "Elias, I told you. Hear me out. I talked to Sheriff Brennan. He's got a range set up behind the jail where he practices. He's willing to let us use it tomorrow afternoon, and he'll be there the whole time as chaperone. Nothing improper about the sheriff teaching the new school teacher some basic safety. I'll just assist." It was a careful arrangement, designed to protect her reputation while still giving her the skills she needed. Beatrice recognized the thought he'd put into it, the consideration for her concerns. "Why is this so important to you?" she asked quietly. Elias was silent for a moment, his jaw working as if he was trying to decide how much to reveal. Finally he said, 7 years ago, when I first came to Willow Creek, there was a woman, schoolteacher, like you. Name was Sarah Miller. She was young, maybe 25, fresh from Philadelphia. Smart, brave, determined to make a difference." His voice had gone flat, emotionless, in the way of someone recounting old pain. There was a drifter passing through town. He decided Sarah was going to be his, whether she wanted to be or not, followed her home one evening, forced his way into her boarding house room. By the time anyone heard her screaming, by the time help arrived, he stopped, swallowed hard. She survived, but she never taught again. Went back east on the next train, broken and terrified. Beatrice felt cold despite the warm afternoon air. Did they catch him? Eventually, Sheriff Brennan tracked him 3 counties over. There was a trial, and they hanged him. Justice served. Elias's voice was bitter. But it didn't undo what happened to Sarah. Didn't give her back her life, her dreams, her sense of safety. He finally met Beatrice's eyes, and she saw raw honesty there, painful and exposed. I was supposed to walk her home that night. She'd asked me to because she'd been feeling nervous about the drifter hanging around. But I was busy with a sick horse, and I told her I'd come by later. By the time I got there, he shook his head. I've lived with that for 7 years, Miss Langford. The knowledge that if I just put her safety ahead of a damn horse, maybe things would have been different. Elias, that wasn't your fault. Wasn't it? I knew she was scared. I knew there was a threat. And I prioritized the wrong thing. He turned away, staring out the window. I can't change the past, but I can try to make sure history doesn't repeat itself. You're new here, you're alone, and you've already made an enemy in Jack Dockery. I'm not trying to control you or suggest you're weak. I'm trying to give you tools so you can protect yourself if I'm not there. So you're not dependent on anyone showing up to rescue you. Beatrice stood very still, absorbing this. She'd thought his concern was about possession, about some primitive male instinct to guard what he considered his, but it wasn't that at all. It was about guilt and responsibility, about trying to right an old wrong by preventing a new one. All right, she said softly. Tomorrow afternoon. If Sheriff Brennan doesn't mind, I'd like to learn. Elias turned back to her, something like relief washing over his features. Thank you. But Elias, what happened to Sarah Miller wasn't your fault. You can't carry that forever. Maybe not forever, but I'll carry it long enough to make sure you stay safe. He settled his hat back on his head. I'll pick you up at Mrs. Abernathy's at 2 o'clock tomorrow. Wear practical clothes. You'll be outdoors. He left before she could respond, his boots echoing on the wooden steps. Beatrice stood in the empty schoolhouse, thinking about Sarah Miller and second chances, and the complex man who seemed determined to protect her whether she wanted protection or not. The next afternoon, true to his word, Elias arrived at Mrs. Abernathy's at precisely 2 o'clock. He was driving a small wagon rather than riding, and his expression was serious as he helped Beatrice climb up to the seat. Mrs. Abernathy watched from the porch, her face approving. You take good care of our teacher, Elias Morgan. Yes, ma'am, that's the plan. The drive to the sheriff's office was short, and they spent it in comfortable silence. Beatrice had changed into her oldest dress, a faded gray cotton that she wouldn't mind getting dirty, and she'd tied her hair back simply rather than pinning it up elaborately. Sheriff Brennan was waiting for them, a stocky man in his 50s with shrewd eyes and a handlebar mustache that would have looked ridiculous on anyone else. He tipped his hat to Beatrice. Miss Langford, heard good things about your first day at school. Billy Jenkins actually doing his work is close to a miracle. He just needed someone to take him seriously, Beatrice said. Well, taking things seriously is something I appreciate. Elias here tells me you need some basic instruction in firearms. That true? It is. Good. Out here, knowing how to handle a gun isn't about being violent. It's about being prepared. Same as knowing first aid or how to start a fire. Just practical survival. He gestured toward the back of the building. Range is set up behind the jail. Nothing fancy, but it'll serve. The range was a cleared area with targets set up against a dirt berm. Sheriff Brennan had arranged several bottles and cans at varying distances, and Beatrice could see the marks of previous practice sessions. Shattered glass, bullet holes in the berm. Elias produced the small pistol he'd given her, along with a box of ammunition. In the bright afternoon light, the gun looked less elegant and more utilitarian, a tool rather than an object. First rule, Sheriff Brennan said, always assume a gun is loaded. Always. Even if you just checked, even if someone tells you it's not, you treat it like it could fire at any moment. For the next hour, they walked Beatrice through the basics. How to hold the gun properly, how to aim, how to squeeze the trigger rather than pulling it, how to reload. Sheriff Brennan did most of the talking, his instructions clear and patient, while Elias demonstrated when words weren't enough. Beatrice fired her first shot and nearly dropped the gun at the recoil. The noise was deafening, the kick stronger than she'd expected. The bullet went wild, missing the target by several feet. That's normal, Elias said quietly, standing close beside her. Try again. Feet shoulder-width apart, bend your knees slightly, both hands on the grip. Support your shooting hand with your other hand. When you aim, line up the sights. See those little notches? That's what you use. She tried again and again and again. Her arms began to ache, her ears rang despite the cotton wool Sheriff Brennan had given her to stuff in them. But gradually, slowly, she began to improve. The shots came closer to the targets. She hit a bottle on her 9th try, and the satisfaction she felt when it shattered was primal and fierce. "Good," Elias murmured. Again. By the time the afternoon shadows had grown long, Beatrice had gone through nearly 50 rounds of ammunition. She'd hit more targets than she'd missed on her final attempts, and while she knew she was far from expert, she felt competent. If Jack Dockery or anyone else tried to threaten her, she could defend herself. "You did well," Sheriff Brennan said as they cleaned up. "Better than most folks on their first day. You've got steady hands and good focus. Practice regularly, and you'll be just fine." "Thank you, Sheriff. I appreciate you taking the time. My job is keeping people safe. If I can teach you to keep yourself safe, that makes my job easier." He nodded to Elias. "You two better head back before folks start talking, though Lord knows they're probably talking anyway." On the drive back to Mrs. Abernathy's, Beatrice was very aware of the gun tucked in her reticule, the weight of it somehow comforting now, rather than frightening. She was also aware of Elias beside her, the solid presence of him, the way his hands controlled the reins with easy competence. "Thank you," she said finally, "for arranging this, for caring enough to insist. You don't need to thank me for doing what's right. Still, it means something." She hesitated, then added, "You can't save everyone, Elias. What happened to Sarah Miller was terrible, but it wasn't your responsibility. Wasn't it? Out here, we're all responsible for each other. That's how communities survive. We look out for one another, protect the vulnerable, stand up when something's wrong." He glanced at her. "You did that when you fought Dockery. You could have let him take your purse, avoided trouble, stayed safe. But you fought because that money mattered to you, because you knew that if you gave in once, you'd be giving in forever." "Yes," Beatrice said quietly. "That's exactly why." "Then you understand. Some things are worth fighting for, and some people—" He stopped, seemed to reconsider his words. "Some people deserve to be protected until they can protect themselves." They'd reached Mrs. Abernathy's. Elias helped Beatrice down from the wagon, his hand steady on her waist for just a moment longer than strictly necessary. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. An understanding, perhaps, or a recognition of possibility. "Same time next week?" he asked. "More practice?" "Yes, I'd like that." He smiled, that slow transformation of his serious face that made something warm bloom in Beatrice's chest. "See you at church Sunday, then. I'll try to actually attend this time." He drove away, and Beatrice stood watching until the wagon disappeared around the corner. Then she went inside, where Mrs. Abernathy was pretending she hadn't been watching from the window. "Productive afternoon?" the older woman asked innocently. "Very," Beatrice replied, and couldn't quite suppress her smile. The week settled into a rhythm. Morning classes at the schoolhouse, where Beatrice worked with her 14 students on reading, writing, arithmetic, geography, and natural science. Afternoons spent preparing lessons, grading work, and meeting with parents who stopped by to discuss their children's progress. Evenings at Mrs. Abernathy's, where she ate dinner with the other boarders, and then retreated to her small room to read or write letters home to her sister. And running through it all like a thread of gold through gray cloth was the growing awareness of Elias Morgan. He didn't visit the schoolhouse every day. His ranch demanded his attention, and he was often away from town for days at a time, dealing with cattle or supplies or the dozens of tasks that came with running a successful operation. But when he was in Willow Creek, he made a point of stopping by, sometimes bringing books he thought she might enjoy, sometimes just checking that she was all right, once bringing a box of apples from a tree on his property. The town noticed. Of course the town noticed. Beatrice heard the whispers, saw the speculative looks. The new teacher and the cowboy bachelor. It was exactly the kind of story small towns love to tell themselves. Mrs. Blackwood made her disapproval known through pointed comments about appropriate behavior. Emily Blackwood parroted her mother's views in class, suggesting that teachers should maintain proper distance from all men. But most of the townspeople seemed approving, or at least amused. Mrs. Abernathy actively encouraged it, finding excuses to invite Elias for dinner or mentioning his ranch whenever the conversation allowed. Beatrice tried to stay focused on her teaching, on building the school into something the community could be proud of. But she couldn't deny the small thrill that ran through her whenever she saw that tall figure on the gray horse riding down Main Street. Couldn't deny the way her heart sped up when his voice called out, "Afternoon, Miss Langford." Couldn't deny that she was beginning to care for him in a way that went far beyond gratitude or friendship. Sunday arrived, and true to his word, Elias appeared at church. Beatrice saw him slip in during the opening hymn, taking a seat near the back. He wore his cleanest clothes, dark trousers, a white shirt, a vest that looked new. And he'd shaved, his jaw smooth and his hair combed back. Several heads turned, surprised to see him. Reverend Hutchins paused mid-sermon, his eyebrows rising, but then continued without comment. After the service, Elias made his way through the churchyard to where Beatrice stood talking with Pete Hawkins about his daughter Annabelle's progress in reading. "Mr. Hawkins," Elias said, nodding politely. "Miss Langford." "Morgan," Pete acknowledged. "Good to see you at services. Been a while. Figured it was time I showed my face. Didn't want the Reverend thinking I'd gone entirely heathen." Pete laughed. "Don't think there's much danger of that. You're one of the most decent men I know, church attendance or no." They talked for a few minutes about cattle and weather, the conversation easy between men who respected each other. Then Pete excused himself to round up his children, leaving Beatrice and Elias standing together in the dappled shade of the cottonwood. "You came," Beatrice said softly. "Said I would." Elias's eyes held hers. "Was wondering if maybe you'd like to take a walk. Nothing improper, just down by the creek, where it's cooler. We could talk without the whole town listening in." Beatrice glanced around the churchyard. Mrs. Abernathy was chatting with Mrs. Chen, but she caught Beatrice's eye and gave a small nod of encouragement. Sheriff Brennan, standing nearby, offered a subtle tip of his hat. Even Pete Hawkins, climbing into his wagon, smiled knowingly. "Yes," Beatrice heard herself say. "I'd like that." They walked through town toward the creek that gave Willow Creek its name, a narrow stream lined with cottonwood trees and willows. The afternoon was warm but not oppressive, and the shade by the water was pleasant. For a while they walked in silence, simply enjoying the coolness and the soft sound of flowing water. Then Elias said, "You're doing well with the school. Everyone's talking about it, how you got Billy Jenkins actually interested in learning, how you're teaching the littlest ones to read, how you treat all the children the same regardless of their families' positions. That's just good teaching. Children respond when they're respected. Not everyone sees it that way. Some folks think there should be hierarchies, that the banker's daughter shouldn't be sitting next to the rancher's son, or the storekeeper's daughter next to the Chinese laundryman's child." Beatrice felt her spine stiffen. "In my classroom, all students are equal. They all deserve the same quality of education, the same opportunities to learn and grow." "I know. That's one reason I wanted to talk to you." Elias stopped walking, turning to face her. "Beatrice, there's going to be pushback. Not from everyone, but from some of the more traditional families. Mrs. Blackwood especially. She's already been talking about how you're too progressive, too egalitarian, how you're giving children ideas above their station. Let her talk. I'm on your side. I want you to know that. If the school board tries to cause trouble, if they try to force you to change your methods or segregate the students or any other damn fool thing, I'll stand with you. So will Sheriff Brennan, Pete Hawkins, Mr. Chen, and a dozen other parents who appreciate what you're doing." The fierce protectiveness in his voice made something warm unfold in Beatrice's chest. "You'd risk your standing in the community for this? For me?" In a heartbeat. He said it simply, as if it were obvious. "Education matters. Treating people with dignity matters. You matter." They stood looking at each other beside the quiet creek, and Beatrice felt the last of her resistance crumbling. She'd come west determined to remain independent, to build a life on her own terms without entangling herself in romance or dependence. But independence didn't mean isolation. It didn't mean refusing help or companionship or the slow, sweet unfolding of affection. "Elias," she said quietly, "what are we doing? Where's this going?" He took a half-step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, see the flecks of darker blue in his pale eyes. "I don't know," he admitted. "All I know is that from the moment I saw you fighting for what was yours, refusing to give up even when you were outmatched. Something shifted in me. I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. Haven't wanted to stop. I came here to escape romantic entanglements, to prove I could build a life alone. You can still do that. I'm not asking you to give up your independence or your teaching or your dreams. I'm just asking for a chance. To spend time together. To see if this thing between us is real or just... He gestured helplessly, searching for words. Just the frontier making us lonely. It's not loneliness, Beatrice said, and knew it was true. I've been lonely for years back in Boston, surrounded by people. This is different. Then what is it? She thought about his quiet strength, his respect for her capabilities, the way he listened when she spoke as if her words mattered. She thought about his gentle handling of that first meeting, his careful arrangement of shooting lessons to protect her reputation, his story about Sarah Miller and the guilt he carried. She thought about how he made her feel, seen, valued, challenged in the best way. Recognition, she finally said. Like, you see who I really am, not who society expects me to be. And you value that person. I do, Elias said roughly. God help me, I do. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she didn't move, his calloused hand cupped her cheek, thumb brushing against her skin with surprising gentleness. Beatrice, he murmured, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. She leaned into his touch, letting herself acknowledge what she'd been fighting for weeks. She cared for this man, more than cared. The feelings growing in her chest were deep and real and terrifying in their intensity. But she wasn't ready, not yet. There was too much at stake, her reputation, her position, her hard-won independence. She needed to be certain before she took this step. Elias, I need time. I need to be sure this is right, that I'm not just swept up in something temporary. His hand dropped away, but his expression remained gentle, understanding. I can give you time, all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. Thank you. They walked back toward town slowly, not touching, but close enough that their shoulders occasionally brushed. By the time they reached Mrs. Abernathy's, the sun was starting its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. I'll see you tomorrow, Elias asked. Same time? More shooting practice? Yes, I'd like to keep improving. You're already improving, but practice never hurts. He tipped his hat, that familiar gesture that had become dear to her. Good evening, Miss Langford. Good evening, Mr. Morgan. She watched him walk away, tall and steady and patient, and felt something settle in her chest. Time. She'd asked for time, and he'd given it without question or pressure. That, more than anything else, told her what kind of man he was. The kind of man she could trust. The kind of man she could love, if she was brave enough to take the risk. The weeks that followed took on a pattern that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. Beatrice threw herself into teaching with renewed passion, watching her students blossom under her attention. Billy Jenkins was reading Hamlet and asking questions that showed genuine intellectual curiosity. Little Emma Chen had progressed from stumbling over simple words to reading entire paragraphs with only occasional help. The Kowalski twins were writing letters to their grandmother in careful, proud script, but threading through all of it was Elias. He came to town twice a week now, always finding some reason to stop by the schoolhouse. Sometimes he brought supplies, a box of new chalk, a set of primers he'd ordered from Denver, once a beautiful globe that made the children gasp with wonder. Other times he just came to talk, leaning against the doorframe while she tidied up after the students had left, their conversations ranging from the practical to the philosophical. They continued the shooting lessons every Tuesday afternoon, and Beatrice found herself actually looking forward to them. Not just for the skills she was acquiring, though those were valuable, but for the quiet companionship, the way Elias stood close beside her as he corrected her stance, the warmth of his presence, and the low rumble of his voice as he offered guidance. She was getting good. Sheriff Brennan said she had a natural eye, steady hands that didn't shake even under pressure. The small pistol had become as familiar to her as her pen or her chalk, a tool she carried with confidence rather than fear. 3 weeks after their walk by the creek, Elias appeared at the schoolhouse on a Saturday afternoon with an invitation that made her pulse quicken. "There's a dance tonight at the town hall," he said, turning his hat in his hands with uncharacteristic nervousness. Nothing fancy, just the town getting together for music and socializing. I was wondering if you'd do me the honor of attending with me." Beatrice set down the papers she'd been grading and studied him. This was different from their shooting lessons or their brief conversations. This was public, deliberate courtship. If she accepted, the whole town would know she was allowing Elias Morgan's attentions. "Mrs. Blackwood will have opinions," she said carefully. "Mrs. Blackwood has opinions about everything. Question is, do you care?" Did she? Beatrice thought about her students, about the progress they'd made, about the respect she'd earned from most of the parents. Mrs. Blackwood was one voice among many, and while she sat on the school board, she didn't control it entirely. More importantly, Beatrice thought about what she wanted. Not what was safe or proper or politically wise, but what would make her happy. "I'd love to attend the dance with you," she said, and watched his face transform with that slow, genuine smile that still had the power to make her breath catch. 7 o'clock? I'll collect you from Mrs. Abernathy's." 7 o'clock. After he left, Beatrice sat for a long moment, her heart racing. She'd just committed to something that went beyond casual friendship or practical lessons. She'd just told the whole town that Elias Morgan meant something to her. Mrs. Abernathy was predictably delighted when Beatrice told her about the invitation. "Oh, how wonderful! Your first real social event in Willow Creek, and with such a fine partner. We must find you something suitable to wear. That green dress, I think, with perhaps a bit of lace at the collar to soften it. And we'll do something special with your hair. Not too elaborate, but definitely more festive than your usual schoolteacher bun." By the time 7 o'clock arrived, Beatrice barely recognized herself in the small mirror. Mrs. Abernathy had worked magic, softening Beatrice's severe style into something that was still respectable but undeniably feminine. The green dress looked fresh with the addition of lace borrowed from Miss Patterson. Her dark hair was swept up but with soft tendrils framing her face, and there was color in her cheeks that owed nothing to rice powder. "You look lovely," Mrs. Abernathy pronounced. "Absolutely lovely. Elias Morgan won't know what hit him." When Elias arrived, climbing down from his wagon with careful attention to the dust on his boots, Beatrice saw his eyes widen. He was dressed in what were clearly his best clothes, dark trousers pressed to a sharp crease, a white shirt so crisp it must be new, a black vest embroidered with subtle silver thread, and a string tie at his throat. He'd shaved and trimmed his hair, and he looked both familiar and transformed, ruggedly handsome in a way that made her mouth go dry. "Miss Langford," he said, his voice rough, "you look beautiful." "Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Morgan." "Elias," he corrected gently. "I think we're past formalities, don't you?" "Elias," she agreed and felt something shift between them, an acknowledgement of intimacy that went beyond the words themselves. He helped her into the wagon with careful attention, his hands strong and steady on her waist. The drive to the town hall was short, but Beatrice found herself acutely aware of his presence beside her, the solid warmth of him, the occasional brush of his shoulder against hers as the wagon jostled over the rough road. The town hall was already crowded when they arrived. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting warm light over the assembled townspeople. Someone had pushed all the furniture to the edges of the room, creating space for dancing. A makeshift band occupied one corner, Pete Hawkins on fiddle, the barber on banjo, and young Mr. Harding from the bank attempting a guitar with more enthusiasm than skill. Conversation died for a moment when Beatrice and Elias entered together. Every head turned, every eye assessed. Then Mrs. Chen smiled warmly and came over to greet them, breaking the spell, and the chatter resumed. "Miss Langford, how nice to see you. And Elias, it's been too long since you came to one of our dances. Emma talks about school constantly. She's so proud of her reading progress." "Emma's a delight to teach," Beatrice said warmly. "She works very hard." Other people approached, offering greetings, commenting on the warm weather, asking about school. Most were friendly, welcoming. But Beatrice couldn't help noticing Mrs. Blackwood standing near the refreshment table, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval, whispering to Reverend Hutchins. "Ignore her," Elias murmured, low enough that only Beatrice could hear. "She's not worth your worry." The music started, a lively reel that had couples flooding onto the dance floor. Elias held out his hand. "May I have this dance?" Beatrice hesitated. She'd learned to dance at the normal school. It was considered part of a teacher's education, useful for chaperoning student events, but she'd never been particularly graceful. And she'd certainly never danced with someone who made her feel the way Elias did, all nervous energy and heightened awareness. "I'm not very good," she warned. "Neither am I. We'll muddle through together." His hand was warm and calloused around hers as he led her onto the floor. The other hand settled at her waist, proper but intimate, and then they were moving, swept into the current of the dance. Elias hadn't lied. He wasn't a polished dancer, but he was steady and strong, guiding her through the steps with quiet confidence, and when she stumbled, he caught her easily, his grip secure. After the first self-conscious moments, Beatrice found herself relaxing, trusting him to lead, letting the music carry her. She looked up to find him watching her, and the expression in his eyes made her breath catch. There was warmth there, an affection, and something deeper that she wasn't quite ready to name. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. "That I'm the luckiest man in Colorado tonight." He said it simply, without flattery or exaggeration. "That I never thought I'd find someone who understood what matters, someone who fights for her beliefs, who treats people with dignity, who's not afraid of hard work or hard truths." "Elias, you don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know." He spun her gently, bringing her back into his arms. "I know you need time. I'm not trying to rush you. Just want you to understand how I feel." The song ended, and they separated reluctantly. Beatrice's heart was pounding, her thoughts in turmoil. Before she could respond, Billy Jenkins appeared at her elbow, his gangly frame dressed in clothes that were clearly borrowed and too small. "Miss Langford, would you dance with me? My ma said I should practice being a gentleman, and I figured I should start with someone who won't laugh if I step on her feet." Beatrice smiled, grateful for the interruption, and touched by the request. "I'd be honored, Billy." She danced with Billy, and then with Pete Hawkins, and then with Sheriff Brennan. Between dances, she chatted with parents, accepted compliments on her teaching, and tried not to think too hard about what Elias had said. But she was always aware of where he was in the room, who he was talking to, the way his eyes sought hers across the crowd. Around 9 o'clock, as the evening was beginning to wind down, Mayor Donovan climbed onto a chair and called for attention. "Folks, before we all head home, I want to take a moment to recognize our new school teacher, Miss Langford. She's been with us just a few weeks, but already she's making a real difference in our children's lives. Billy Jenkins is reading Shakespeare for crying out loud. Emma Chen can't stop talking about school. Miss Langford, would you stand up so we can show our appreciation?" Beatrice felt heat flood her face as she stood, the room erupting in applause. She nodded her thanks, acutely uncomfortable being the center of attention, and sat back down as quickly as possible. But the damage was done. Now Mrs. Blackwood had even more reason to view her as a threat, someone gaining too much influence in the community. Sure enough, as people began to leave, Mrs. Blackwood approached with Emily trailing behind her like an ornate shadow. "Miss Langford, how nice that the mayor recognizes your contributions. Though I do hope all this attention won't go to your head. Pride, after all, comes before a fall." Her smile was sharp as glass. "I've been meaning to speak with you about Emily's education. I'm concerned that she's not being sufficiently challenged in your classroom." "Emily is doing excellent work," Beatrice said evenly. "Her composition last week on westward expansion was thoughtful and well-researched." "Yes, but she could be doing so much more if she weren't held back by the slower students. Perhaps you might consider separating the advanced students from the others, creating different tiers based on ability." "You mean based on family position?" Elias said quietly, appearing at Beatrice's shoulder. He'd been across the room talking to Mr. Chen, but he must have sensed trouble brewing. "That's what you really mean, isn't it, Mrs. Blackwood?" Mrs. Blackwood's expression turned glacial. "I mean nothing of the sort, Mr. Morgan, though I find it interesting that you're so involved in school matters, considering you have no children of your own. I have 15 ranch hands who want to learn to read and write. Miss Langford's agreed to teach evening classes once the day school is well established. That makes school matters my business." He didn't raise his voice, but there was steel beneath the courtesy. "And I think her methods are working just fine. All the children are improving, regardless of their families' positions or wealth. Seems like that's exactly what education should do." "Easy for you to say when you have no stake in maintaining proper social structures," Mrs. Blackwood snapped. But some of us understand that order and hierarchy are what keep communities civilized. If we start treating everyone as equal, chaos will follow. If we start treating everyone with dignity and respect, justice will follow, Beatrice said firmly. Mrs. Blackwood, I appreciate your concern for Emily's education, but I won't be creating separate tiers in my classroom. All students learn together, help each other, grow together. That's not negotiable. Mrs. Blackwood's face flushed with anger. We'll see what the school board has to say about your methods, Miss Langford. We'll see indeed. She swept away, Emily scurrying after her, leaving Beatrice trembling with suppressed anger and anxiety. That went well, Elias said dryly. She's going to try to get me fired. She's going to try. Won't succeed, though. She's 1 vote out of 4 on the board, and Mayor Donovan and Mr. Chen both support you. Reverend Hutchins is on the fence, but I think he'll come around once he sees how much the children are learning. Elias touched her elbow gently. Don't let her rattle you. You're doing important work, and most people recognize that. Most people isn't everyone? No. But you can't please everyone, Beatrice. Sometimes you have to choose between doing what's right and doing what's popular. I know which one you'll choose. His faith in her was both steadying and humbling. Beatrice took a deep breath, forcing herself to relax. She wouldn't let Mrs. Blackwood's threats ruin what had been a lovely evening. Take me home? She asked softly. Always. The ride back to Mrs. Abernathy's was quiet, both of them lost in thought. The night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky in glittering profusion. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and another answered. When they arrived at the boarding house, Elias helped Beatrice down from the wagon and walked her to the porch. In the shadows, away from prying eyes, he took her hand. Thank you for tonight, for coming with me, for letting folks see us together. I know it complicated things for you. Mrs. Blackwood was going to find a reason to attack me eventually. At least this way, I got to spend the evening with someone I... She stopped, the words catching in her throat. Someone you what? His voice was soft, hopeful. Someone I care about, Beatrice finished quietly. More than I expected to, more than I'm entirely comfortable with, if I'm being honest. Elias lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was courtly, old-fashioned, and it made her heart turn over in her chest. I care about you too, more than I can properly express. And I'll be here, Beatrice. Whatever happens with the school board, whatever challenges come, I'll be here. I know, she whispered, and realized it was true. Whatever else she was uncertain about, she trusted this, trusted him. He released her hand reluctantly and stepped back. Good night. Sleep well. Good night, Elias. She watched him drive away into the darkness, then went inside to find Mrs. Abernathy waiting in the parlor with hot tea and an eager expression. Well, tell me everything. How was the dancing? What did people say? Did Elias behave like a gentleman? Beatrice sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. It was lovely and complicated, and Mrs. Blackwood is going to try to get me dismissed. Oh, pish! That woman tries to get everyone dismissed who doesn't bow to her every whim. You just keep doing what you're doing and let the school board see the results. Quality education speaks for itself. I hope you're right. I'm always right about these things, dear. Now, drink your tea and tell me what Elias said that has you looking so flustered and happy at the same time. The school board meeting was called for the following Thursday evening, and Beatrice spent the days leading up to it in a state of controlled anxiety. She prepared careful documentation of every student's progress, examples of their work, detailed lesson plans showing how she was meeting the territory's educational requirements. Billy Jenkins, sensing her worry, organized the other students in a show of support. On Wednesday afternoon, after regular classes ended, 12 of the 14 students appeared with their parents at the schoolhouse. We want to come to the meeting tomorrow, Billy announced, to tell the board how good you are at teaching. Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes. Billy, that's incredibly kind, but you don't have to. We want to, little Emma Chen piped up, her voice stronger than Beatrice had ever heard it. You're the best teacher we've ever had. You make learning fun. You treat us all the same, one of the Kowalski twins added, like we all matter equally. Their parents nodded in agreement. Mrs. Chen spoke up, her English careful but clear. You teach my Emma with same care as you teach Banker's daughter. That means something. That mean everything. Pete Hawkins cleared his throat gruffly. My Annabelle's reading at a level I never thought possible. Jessie's actually interested in history. You've worked miracles, Miss Langford, and we won't let some busybody on the school board undo that. The meeting was held in the town hall, the same space where the dance had been just days before. The school board sat at a table facing rows of chairs that were rapidly filling with townspeople. Beatrice arrived early with Mrs. Abernathy, her stomach churning with nerves. Elias was already there, standing near the back wall with Sheriff Brennan and several other men. When he caught her eye, he nodded once, a gesture of solidarity and support that steadied her. Reverend Hutchins called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of his gavel. We're here tonight to discuss certain concerns that have been raised about the conduct and methods of our school teacher, Miss Beatrice Langford. Mrs. Blackwood, as you brought these concerns to the board's attention, perhaps you'd like to begin. Mrs. Blackwood stood, her posture perfect, her voice carrying clearly. Thank you, Reverend. I want to state clearly that I have no personal animosity toward Miss Langford. I'm sure she means well. However, I have serious concerns about her teaching methods and the example she's setting for our children. She paused dramatically, making sure she had everyone's attention. First, she refuses to separate students by ability level, which holds back our brightest children and frustrates our slower learners. Second, she's introducing inappropriate materials, Shakespeare, for instance, which contains violence and questionable moral content. Third, she's spending too much time on impractical subjects like geography and natural science instead of focusing on basic reading and arithmetic. And finally, her personal conduct has been less than exemplary for someone in a position of moral authority over children. The last point was delivered with a pointed look at Elias, and Beatrice felt her face heat with anger. Those are serious accusations, Mayor Donovan rumbled. Miss Langford, would you like to respond? Beatrice stood, forcing her voice to remain calm and professional. I'd be happy to address each point. First, regarding ability levels. Yes, I teach all students together. This isn't laziness or incompetence. It's pedagogically sound practice. Advanced students help reinforce their own learning by assisting those who are struggling. Struggling students are inspired by seeing what they can achieve. Everyone benefits. She pulled out the portfolio of student work she'd prepared. I have documentation here showing that every single student has improved in the 5 weeks I've been teaching. Billy Jenkins has advanced 2 grade levels in reading comprehension. Emma Chen has gone from barely recognizing letters to reading simple books independently. The Kowalski twins are writing letters in English when they could barely speak it at the start of the term. She passed the portfolio to Reverend Hutchins, who began leafing through it with raised eyebrows. As for Shakespeare, Beatrice continued, I'm teaching Hamlet to my advanced students because it's challenging, engaging literature that deals with universal themes, justice, loyalty, moral responsibility. Yes, there's violence in it, but there's also poetry and philosophy and profound insight into human nature. I trust that our children are capable of handling complex material if it's properly contextualized. But is it appropriate for children? Mrs. Blackwood interjected. Shouldn't they be reading morally instructive texts instead? They're reading both. We study Bible passages alongside Shakespeare, folk tales alongside history. I believe in a well-rounded education that prepares children to think critically, not just to recite what they're told. Beatrice turned back to the board. As for spending too much time on geography and science, I'm following the territorial curriculum guidelines exactly. But beyond that, I believe children should understand the world they live in, where their families came from, how the natural world works, their place in the larger context of history and civilization. Mr. Chen nodded approvingly. My Emma know more about world now than I knew at 20. That is good thing. And my personal conduct, Beatrice said, her voice cooling several degrees, has been entirely appropriate. Yes, I've been seen in the company of Mr. Morgan. We've attended church together, gone to a community dance, and he's been teaching me to shoot, with Sheriff Brennan as chaperone, I might add, for my own safety. There has been nothing improper about any of these interactions. A single woman spending so much time with a bachelor inevitably causes talk, Mrs. Blackwood said primly. It sets a bad example for our daughters, suggesting that forward behavior is acceptable. Before Beatrice could respond, Elias stepped forward from his position against the wall. His voice when he spoke was quiet, but carried an edge that made everyone pay attention. Excuse me, but I think I should address this directly, since it's my character being called into question along with Miss Langford's. I've been spending time with her because I admire her intelligence, her dedication to her students, and her courage. If that's considered improper courtship in this town, then this town's standards need examining. A murmur ran through the crowd. Several women nodded agreement while others looked scandalized. Furthermore, Elias continued, Miss Langford agreed to learn shooting for her own protection after Jack Dockery threatened her. Sheriff Brennan and I both felt it was a necessary skill given the circumstances. If anyone wants to question whether that was appropriate, I'd be happy to discuss it outside. Sheriff Brennan stepped forward as well. For the record, I was present at every shooting lesson. Miss Langford's conduct was completely professional, and her progress has been remarkable. She can now defend herself if necessary, which makes my job easier. I see nothing improper about a woman learning practical survival skills. Pete Hawkins stood up from the audience. Seems to me we're missing the point here. The question isn't whether Miss Langford attended a dance or learned to shoot. The question is whether she's a good teacher. And the answer to that is obvious to anyone with eyes. My children have learned more in 5 weeks with her than they did in 6 months with the previous teacher. Mine too, called out another parent. My son actually wants to go to school now. My daughter's reading has improved dramatically, added Mrs. Chen. Billy's behavior has completely turned around, Mrs. Jenkins said, standing. He used to get in fights almost daily. Now he comes home talking about Shakespeare and asking to read more books. Miss Langford reached him when no one else could. Billy himself stood up, his young face serious. Miss Langford treats us like we matter, like we're capable of learning hard things and thinking for ourselves. She doesn't just lecture at us, she asks what we think, encourages us to question and explore. That's what a real teacher does. The room erupted in support, parents and even some students standing to offer testimonials. Beatrice felt overwhelmed by the outpouring, by the realization that she'd made a real impact in such a short time. Reverend Hutchins rapped his gavel for silence. When the room finally quieted, he looked at Beatrice with an expression that was hard to read. Miss Langford, I'll be frank. When you first arrived, I had reservations. You seemed too educated, too progressive, perhaps too independent for what we needed. But I've been watching your work, and I've been impressed by the results. My own grandson has been attending your school, and he's shown more enthusiasm for learning than I've ever seen from him. He paused, glancing at the portfolio of student work still open before him. The question Mrs. Blackwood raised about your teaching methods is ultimately a question about what we want education to be. Do we want to simply maintain the status quo, teaching children to know their place and accept things as they are? Or do we want to prepare them to think critically, to question, to build something better than what we've given them? Reverend, surely you're not suggesting that questioning authority is appropriate, Mrs. Blackwood protested. I'm suggesting that blind obedience isn't the same as moral character. And I'm suggesting that Miss Langford is teaching our children to be thoughtful, moral, capable individuals who can contribute meaningfully to society. That seems aligned with Christian values to me. He turned to the other board members. I move that we dismiss Mrs. Blackwood's concerns and affirm our full support for Miss Langford's continued employment and teaching methods. Seconded, Mayor Donovan said immediately. All in favor? 3 hands went up. Reverend Hutchins, Mayor Donovan, and Mr. Chen. Only Mrs. Blackwood sat with her hands folded, her face rigid with fury. Motion carries. Miss Langford, you have the board's full support. Please continue the excellent work you've been doing. Reverend Hutchins banged his gavel. Meeting adjourned. The room erupted in applause and cheers. Beatrice found herself surrounded by parents offering congratulations, students hugging her, even some of the more conservative townspeople nodding approval. Through the crowd, she saw Elias watching her, his face transformed by a smile of pure pride and joy. She smiled back, her heart soaring with relief and triumph. Later, after the crowd had dispersed and the hall was empty except for a few stragglers, Elias found her standing alone near the doorway, trying to process everything that had happened. You did it, he said simply. You won. We did it. I couldn't have faced them without knowing you were there supporting me. She turned to him, suddenly unable to hold back everything she'd been feeling. Elias, what you said tonight, about courting me, About admiring me. Did you mean it? Every word. He stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. I know you wanted time. I know you're trying to establish yourself here. But I also know life's too short and too uncertain to waste, and I don't want to waste another day not telling you how I feel. How do you feel? Like I've been waiting my whole life to meet someone like you. Someone strong and principled and brave enough to fight for what matters. Someone who sees me as I am and doesn't try to change me. Someone who makes me want to be better than I am. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Beatrice, I'm falling in love with you. Have been since you bit that bandit and refused to let go of what was yours. The words hung between them, honest and vulnerable and terrifying in their intensity. Beatrice felt her heart racing, her carefully constructed defenses crumbling. I'm scared, she admitted. I've built my whole life around being independent, not needing anyone. The idea of letting someone in, of depending on someone. I'm not asking you to depend on me. I'm asking to walk beside you, to support your dreams while pursuing my own, to build something together that's stronger than what either of us could build alone. He reached out, cupping her face in his hand with infinite gentleness. I'm asking for a partnership, Beatrice. Not possession, not dependence. Just two people who respect and admire each other, choosing to face life together. She leaned into his touch, letting herself acknowledge what she'd been fighting for weeks. She was falling in love with him too, with his quiet strength, his respect for her independence, his understanding of what mattered, with the way he made her feel seen and valued and cherished. Yes, she whispered. Yes to all of it, to walking beside you, to building something together, to taking this risk even though it terrifies me. His smile was radiant, transforming his weathered face into something beautiful. Yeah? Yeah. He pulled her close, and she went willingly, letting herself sink into his embrace. He was solid and warm and real, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Beatrice felt like she'd come home. When he finally pulled back enough to look at her face, his expression was tender and wondering. Can I kiss you? She answered by rising on her toes and pressing her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, both of them learning the shape and taste of each other. Then it deepened, became something more urgent, more honest. His arms tightened around her waist, and she threaded her fingers through his hair, feeling the silky texture of it, breathing in the scent of him, leather and sage and something uniquely Elias. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Beatrice felt dizzy with joy and desire, and a sense of rightness that went soul deep. We should probably not kiss in the town hall, she said breathlessly. People will talk. Let them talk. But he stepped back, giving her space, his hand reaching for hers instead. Come on, I'll walk you home. They walked through the quiet streets hand in hand, and Beatrice marveled at how natural it felt, how right. For so long she'd believed that independence meant isolation, that strength meant never needing anyone. But Elias had shown her a different truth, that the strongest bonds were the ones freely chosen, that real partnership enhanced rather than diminished individual strength. At Mrs. Abernathy's porch, he kissed her again, sweet and lingering, a promise of more to come. Saturday, he said, come out to the ranch. I want to show you my home, my life. I want you to see what I've built. I'd love that. I'll pick you up at noon. Bring comfortable clothes. We'll be outside most of the day. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, a gentle caress that sent shivers through her. And Beatrice, thank you for taking this chance on me, on us. Thank you for being patient, for giving me time to understand what I wanted. I'd wait forever if that's what it took. He released her hand reluctantly. Good night. Dream of me. I will, she promised, and knew it was true. She watched him walk away into the darkness, her heart full to bursting, and realized that everything had changed tonight, not just with the school board, though that victory was significant, but something deeper had shifted. She'd stopped fighting against the possibility of love and had chosen instead to embrace it. And for the first time since coming west, Beatrice Langford felt truly, completely happy. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect autumn day that made the Colorado sky look impossibly blue. Beatrice woke with butterflies dancing in her stomach, a nervous excitement that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with anticipation. She dressed carefully in her oldest dress, the gray cotton that had seen her through her first day at the schoolhouse, and sturdy boots that could handle rough terrain. Mrs. Abernathy had packed a basket with bread, cheese, and apples, insisting that a day at the ranch required proper provisions. "Now, you'll be properly chaperoned, won't you?" Mrs. Abernathy asked, though her eyes twinkled with amusement. "I'd hate for tongues to wag after we just got the school board settled. Elias mentioned his housekeeper would be there, and several of his ranch hands. It'll be perfectly respectable." Beatrice tied on her bonnet, checking her reflection one last time. "Besides, after Thursday night, I think the town knows where things stand between us." "That they do, dear, that they do." Mrs. Abernathy patted her arm affectionately. "Elias Morgan is a good man, one of the best. You've chosen well." Beatrice felt warmth spread through her chest at the words, chosen. Yes, that was exactly what she'd done. After weeks of uncertainty and fear, she'd made a choice, not out of desperation or loneliness, but from genuine affection and respect. It felt liberating in a way she hadn't expected. Elias arrived precisely at noon, driving the same wagon he'd used to take her to the dance. But today he seemed different, more relaxed, his smile coming easier, as if Thursday night's declaration had lifted some weight from his shoulders. "Ready?" he asked, helping her up to the seat. "Ready," she confirmed, settling beside him with the basket at her feet. The ride out of town took them east across open prairie, the road little more than packed dirt tracks winding between patches of sage and buffalo grass. Mountains rose to the west, their peaks already dusted with early snow. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of earth and growing things. "Tell me about your ranch," Beatrice said, watching the landscape roll past. "How did you come to settle here?" Elias was quiet for a moment, organizing his thoughts. "I left Missouri when I was 23. My pa had died the year before, and my ma followed him within 6 months. There was nothing holding me there, no land, no prospects, just poverty and memories. So I worked my way west, taking jobs where I could find them. Cowhand, stable boy, even a stint as a cook's assistant on a cattle drive." He smiled at the memory. "I was terrible at cooking, nearly poisoned the whole crew with my first attempt at biscuits. But I learned to sit a horse well, learned to read the land and the weather, learned what made a good rancher versus a bad one. By the time I got to Colorado, I'd saved enough to buy a small piece of property and a few head of cattle." "How small?" 160 acres. Nothing much. The previous owner had given up after one hard winter, but I saw potential. Good water from the creek, natural shelter in the cottonwood groves, decent grazing. I worked that land myself for 2 years, dawn to dusk every day, slowly building up the herd. Then I hired my first hand, Miguel. He's still with me, and things started growing from there." There was pride in his voice, the satisfaction of someone who'd built something with his own hands and determination. Beatrice found herself falling a little more in love with him, with his work ethic and his vision. "How big is it now?" "Just over 2,000 acres. I've bought up neighboring properties as folks gave up or moved on. Got about 300 head of cattle, 24 horses, and those 15 men I mentioned. It's not the biggest operation in the territory, but it's profitable and sustainable. More importantly, it's mine. Nobody can take it away or tell me I don't belong there." The possessiveness in that last sentence spoke volumes about his past, about growing up poor and landless in a world where property meant power. Beatrice understood that hunger for security, for something solid and permanent. She'd felt it herself in her determination to keep her purse, to maintain her independence. They crested a small rise, and suddenly the ranch spread before them. Beatrice caught her breath at the sight. The main house was larger than she'd expected, a 2-story structure of weathered wood with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid and well-maintained, with glass windows that caught the afternoon sun and a stone chimney rising from the center. Near the house stood a substantial barn, painted red and white, with a corral attached. Beyond that were several smaller buildings, a bunkhouse for the hands, she assumed, and various sheds and storage buildings. But what really caught her attention was the setting. The ranch sat in a shallow valley, protected from the worst winds by gentle hills on 3 sides. A creek, the same one that gave Willow Creek its name, ran along the eastern boundary, lined with cottonwoods that were just beginning to turn gold. Cattle grazed peacefully in fenced pastures, and she could see horses in the corral, their coats gleaming in the sunlight. It was beautiful, not in a cultivated, domesticated way, but with a raw, honest beauty that suited the land and the man who'd claimed it. "Elias," she breathed, "it's wonderful." His smile was boyish with pleasure. "You think so? I know it's rough compared to what you're used to, but it's perfect," she interrupted firmly. "It looks like home." Something in his expression shifted, became more vulnerable. "I hope it will be. Someday." The implication hung between them, too new and precious to examine too closely. Beatrice reached over and squeezed his hand, letting the gesture speak for her. As they approached the main house, a woman emerged onto the porch. She was perhaps 60, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and a face that had seen its share of hardship but retained a fundamental kindness. She wore a simple dress protected by a white apron, and she wiped her hands on it as she watched them approach. "That's Rosa," Elias said quietly. "She's been with me for 4 years, ever since her husband died. Keeps the house, does the cooking, and generally makes sure I don't live like a complete barbarian." He pulled the wagon to a stop and helped Beatrice down, then led her up to the porch. "Rosa, this is Miss Beatrice Langford, the school teacher I told you about. Beatrice, Rosa Martinez. She's the real boss around here, though I pretend to be in charge." Rosa's weathered face creased into a smile. "Welcome, Miss Langford. Elias has spoken of you often. It's good to finally meet the woman who has captured his attention so completely." Beatrice felt herself blushing. "Thank you for having me, Mrs. Martinez. Your home is lovely." "It's his home. I just keep it livable." Rosa gestured toward the door. Come in, come in. I have coffee and cake ready. You must be thirsty from the ride." The interior of the house was as well kept as the exterior suggested. The main room served as both parlor and dining area, with sturdy furniture that showed signs of careful craftsmanship. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and above it hung a rifle, functional, not decorative. The floors were wood, polished to a soft shine, with several rag rugs adding warmth and color. But what caught Beatrice's attention were the books. An entire wall was lined with shelves, and those shelves were crammed with volumes. Everything from practical manuals on animal husbandry to collections of poetry, from histories to novels to scientific treatises. "You're a reader," she said, delight coloring her voice as she moved toward the shelves. "Told you, that teacher back in Missouri changed my life. Once I learned to read, I couldn't stop. Started collecting books wherever I could find them. Mail order catalogs, traveling salesmen, even traded cattle for a complete set of Shakespeare once." Elias stood beside her, running his hand along the spines with obvious affection. "Some of the hands think I'm crazy, spending money on books instead of more cattle. But knowledge is worth more than beef in the long run." Beatrice pulled out a volume at random, Leaves of Grass, the same edition she owned. She opened it to find careful annotations in the margins, evidence of someone engaging deeply with the text. "You wrote in it," she said softly. "Hope that's not sacrilege. I like to note down thoughts as I read, questions that come up, connections to other things I've learned." He looked almost embarrassed. Probably looks foolish to someone with formal education. "It looks like scholarship," Beatrice corrected. "Real engagement with ideas. This is exactly what I try to teach my students, that reading isn't passive, that books are conversations we have with the authors across time and distance." Rosa appeared with a tray bearing coffee and slices of cake that smelled of cinnamon and apples. "You two can discuss books all afternoon if you like, but eat first. Elias, show the lady around properly before you disappear into philosophy." They ate at the sturdy dining table, and Beatrice learned more about the workings of the ranch. Rosa explained how she managed the household, baking bread twice a week, doing laundry for Elias and any of the hands who paid her a small fee, maintaining the kitchen garden that provided vegetables through the summer and fall. "The work never ends," Rosa said with a shrug. "But it's honest work, and Elias treats me with respect. That's more than I had in my last position." After the cake was finished, Elias offered his hand to Beatrice. "Come on, I'll show you the rest." They walked first to the barn, a cavernous space that smelled of hay and horses and leather. Elias's gray gelding, the same one he'd been riding that first day, nickered in greeting from his stall. Several other horses poked their heads out curiously as Elias and Beatrice passed. "This is Storm," Elias said, stroking the gray's nose affectionately. "Had him since he was a yearling. Smartest horse I've ever known, and the most stubborn. Kind of like someone else I could mention." Beatrice laughed. "Are you comparing me to your horse?" "Only in the best ways. Strong, intelligent, beautiful, refuses to be broken or controlled." His eyes held hers, warm with affection and something deeper. "Yeah, I guess I am." He showed her the tack room, where saddles and bridles hung in neat rows, all well oiled and maintained, the feed room with its barrels of oats and corn, the hayloft where winter fodder was stored. "We put up about 50 tons of hay each summer," he explained. "Have to get the cattle through winter. It's back-breaking work, but necessary." From the barn, they walked to the corral where several young horses were being trained. A lean Mexican man was working with a skittish sorrel, speaking to it in low, soothing Spanish as he gentled it to accept a saddle blanket. "That's Miguel," Elias said. "Best horse trainer I've ever seen. He's got patience I'll never have." Miguel looked up at their approach and smiled, revealing a gold tooth. "Patron? And this must be the famous teacher. Welcome, señorita." "Thank you. That's beautiful work you're doing." "Horses are like people," Miguel said, returning his attention to the sorrel. "Each one different, each one needing something specific to trust you. This one, she's been mistreated before. I have to show her that not all humans will hurt her. Takes time, but she's worth it." They watched for a few minutes as Miguel worked, his movements patient and deliberate. Gradually, the horse's tension eased, and it allowed the blanket to rest on its back without flinching. "See?" Miguel said with satisfaction. "She learns. Soon she will carry a saddle, then a rider. She will be magnificent." As they continued walking, Elias pointed out various aspects of the ranch: the system of irrigation ditches that brought water from the creek to the pastures, the windmill that pumped water for the house and barn, the root cellar where vegetables were stored for winter. "I'm trying to make the place as self-sufficient as possible," he explained. "The more we can produce ourselves, the less we're dependent on supply lines or weather or other people's goodwill. It's about security, but also about freedom, being able to weather hard times without losing everything." They climbed a small hill behind the house, and from the top, the full scope of the ranch was visible. The buildings nestled in the valley, the cattle scattered across the grasslands, the creek winding like a silver ribbon through the cottonwoods, and beyond it all, the mountains rising against the impossibly blue sky. Elias stood beside her, his shoulder touching hers. "I brought you up here because this is my favorite spot on the whole property. When things get hard or complicated, I come up here and look at what I've built. Reminds me why I work so hard, what I'm protecting." "It's breathtaking," Beatrice said honestly. "I want to build something more, though. Not just a profitable ranch, but a legacy. Something that matters beyond just making money." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "I want to build evening classes for my men and anyone else who wants to learn. Want to maybe set up a small library that folks from surrounding ranches can use. Want to create opportunities for people who didn't get the chances I eventually got." His vision was larger than she'd realized, encompassing not just personal success, but community betterment. It aligned so perfectly with her own values that Beatrice felt something click into place in her chest. "I could help with that," she said quietly. "The evening classes, the library. I have experience with adult education, and I'd love to be part of building something meaningful." "I was hoping you'd say that." He took her hands in his calloused fingers warm and sure. "Beatrice, I need to say something, and I need you to really hear me. I know we've only known each other a few weeks. I know by conventional standards, this is too fast, too sudden. But out here, time works differently. We learn to recognize what matters quickly because we might not get a second chance." Her heart was pounding, but she nodded for him to continue. "That first day when I saw you fighting for what was yours, refusing to give up even when you were clearly outmatched, something shifted in me. And every day since, every conversation, every moment we've spent together, that feeling has grown stronger. You're brilliant and brave and stubborn and kind. You see people for who they really are, not just what society says they should be. You fight for what's right even when it costs you." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "I'm falling in love with you, Beatrice Langford. Actually, I think I'm already there. I love your fierce independence and your generous heart. I love the way you stand up to bullies and the way you're patient with struggling students. I love how you bite bandits and learn to shoot and refuse to compromise your principles, even when it would be easier. Tears pricked Beatrice's eyes, emotion welling up so strongly she could barely breathe. I don't want to rush you, Elias continued, but I also don't want to waste time pretending I feel less than I do. So I'm asking, not for an answer today, not even next week, but I'm asking you to think about a future together. Not you giving up your teaching or me giving up my ranch, but both of us building something bigger than either of us could build alone. A partnership of equals working toward shared goals. Elias, her voice broke on his name. There's more. I need you to know what you'd be getting into. His jaw tightened. This ranch is successful now, but it's always one disaster away from failure. A hard winter, a drought, disease in the cattle, any of those could wipe me out. I work dawn to dusk most days, and there will be times when the ranch has to come first, when I'll be exhausted and stressed and not the best company. I'm stubborn and independent, and I've been alone so long that sharing my life with someone will require adjustment. He looked away briefly, then back, his eyes fierce with honesty. And some people in town will never fully accept me. I hire Chinese and Mexican workers. I treat them as equals, and that rubs people wrong. I don't attend church regularly enough for some, and I'm too educated for others. Association with me might complicate your position, make some people question your judgment. Are you trying to talk me out of caring for you? Beatrice asked, half laughing through her tears. I'm trying to be honest. You deserve to know the reality, not some romantic notion of ranch life. She stepped closer to him, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. I appreciate your honesty. So let me be equally honest. Yes, I'm scared. I spent years building walls around my heart, convincing myself that independence meant isolation. The idea of trusting someone enough to build a life together is terrifying. She took a breath, steadying herself. But I'm more scared of the alternative, of playing it safe and ending up alone, having protected my heart so well that it atrophies from disuse. You asked me to think about a future together, but the truth is, I've been thinking about little else for weeks. Elias's eyes widened with hope, but she pressed a finger to his lips to stop him from speaking. I love that you respect my work and my independence. I love that you challenge me intellectually and support me emotionally. I love your vision for something bigger than just personal success. And yes, I love you, your stubbornness and your kindness, your rough edges and your gentle heart. I love that you see me as an equal partner, not as something to possess or control. She lowered her hand, letting it rest against his chest where she could feel his heart pounding. I can't promise I'll be easy to live with. I'm opinionated and independent, and I won't give up my teaching. There will be times when my work at the school conflicts with ranch needs, and we'll have to figure out how to balance both priorities. And I come with my own complications. Mrs. Blackwood will probably never forgive me for defying her, and there are other families who think I'm too progressive, too educated, too unmarried to be a proper moral example. Beatrice, I'm not finished. She smiled through her tears. What I'm trying to say, in my awkward, overthinking way, is yes. Yes, I want to think about a future together. Yes, I want to build something with you. Yes, I'm willing to take this risk, even though it terrifies me. Because the alternative, walking away from this, from you, from us, would be the biggest mistake of my life. For a moment, Elias just stared at her, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. Then he swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around, his laughter ringing out across the valley. When he finally set her down, they were both laughing and crying at the same time, clutching each other like they might blow away if they let go. I was prepared to wait months, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Years, if necessary. I never expected— I'm full of surprises, Beatrice said. You should probably get used to that. I look forward to it. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. Can I kiss you properly now? Not in town where people are watching, but here, where it's just us. Please, she whispered. The kiss was different from their previous ones, deeper, more confident, full of promise and passion and the joy of mutual understanding. His arms tightened around her waist, and she pressed closer, one hand tangling in his hair, while the other gripped his shoulder. The world fell away, narrowing to just the two of them, the taste and feel and rightness of finally letting go, finally admitting what they both wanted. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Elias rested his forehead against hers. "I want to marry you, Beatrice Langford. Not today, not even next month, but soon. As soon as you're ready. Will you at least think about it?" Her heart was so full she thought it might burst. "I'll think about it. But Elias, I don't think I'll need as much time as you might expect. When you know something's right, when you find someone who sees you completely and loves you anyway, why wait?" His smile was radiant. Why wait indeed? They stood there on the hilltop for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the sun begin its slow descent toward the mountains. Below them, the ranch continued its daily rhythms, cattle grazing, horses moving in the corral, smoke rising from the bunkhouse chimney as someone prepared the evening meal. Eventually, they made their way back down to the house, their hands linked, their shoulders bumping companionably. Rosa took one look at their faces and smiled knowingly. "I take it the tour went well?" "Very well," Elias confirmed. "Rosa, I think you should start planning a wedding." Rosa's face lit up with delight. "About time! I was beginning to think you two would dance around each other forever. When?" Beatrice laughed. "We haven't actually discussed that yet. Soon, but we need to figure out details." "Soon is good enough for me," Rosa declared. "I'll start making plans. You'll want to have it at the ranch, yes? The church is nice, but here is more personal. We can set up in the yard, have tables for a meal. It will be beautiful." They spent the rest of the afternoon making tentative plans, discussing possibilities, dreaming aloud about the future. Beatrice would continue teaching. That was non-negotiable for both of them. But she could live at the ranch, making the daily ride into town. It was only 5 miles, manageable on horseback once she learned to ride properly. "I'll teach you," Elias promised. "We've got a gentle mare that would be perfect for you, sweet-tempered and reliable. You'll be riding like you were born to it within a few weeks." "I'll probably fall off repeatedly," Beatrice warned. "Probably. But you'll get back on, because that's who you are." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple, Elias drove Beatrice back to town. They were both quiet, wrapped in the comfortable silence of two people who've said the important things and can now simply be together. When they reached Mrs. Abernathy's, Elias helped Beatrice down and walked her to the porch. In the fading light, his face was shadowed, but his eyes were bright. "Thank you for today," he said quietly. "For seeing my home, for understanding what I'm trying to build, for saying yes to the possibility of us. Thank you for being patient with me, for giving me time to work through my fears." She touched his face gently, tracing the line of his jaw. "I meant what I said up on that hill. I love you, Elias Morgan." "I love you too, Beatrice Langford, more than I knew I could love anyone." He kissed her one more time, gentle and sweet, a benediction rather than a passionate declaration. Then he stepped back, tipping his hat in that gesture that had become so dear to her. "I'll see you at church tomorrow, and Monday after school we'll start your riding lessons. Fair?" "Fair." She watched him drive away, then floated into the house where Mrs. Abernathy was waiting with barely contained excitement. "Well, tell me everything. How was the ranch?" "What did you talk about? Did he—" "He asked me to marry him," Beatrice interrupted, unable to keep the joy from her voice. "Well, not exactly asked, more said he wanted to ask, wanted me to think about it, and I said yes. Or I said I'd think about it, but I already know the answer is yes." Mrs. Abernathy let out a shriek of delight and pulled Beatrice into a crushing embrace. "Oh, my dear, I knew it. From that very first day when he looked at you and said, 'That's my kind of woman,' I knew this would happen. When? When will you marry?" "We haven't decided. Soon, though. Maybe in a few weeks?" Beatrice laughed at her own recklessness. "Is this crazy?" "It feels crazy. I've known him less than 2 months. Out here you learn to recognize what matters quickly. Time doesn't measure the same way it does back east." Mrs. Abernathy held Beatrice at arm's length, her eyes bright with happy tears. "You found a good man who respects you, loves you, wants to build a life with you as an equal partner. That's not crazy, dear. That's a miracle." That night, lying in her small room under the eaves, Beatrice thought about miracles and choices and the strange path that had brought her here. She'd come west running from something, the suffocation of predictable spinsterhood, the pity in her sister's eyes, the certainty that her life was already written and all that remained was to live out its tedious chapters. But she'd found something instead. Purpose in her teaching. Community in this rough frontier town. And love with a man who saw her strength as something to celebrate rather than something to tame. She touched her lips, remembering Elias's kisses, and smiled into the darkness. In 3 weeks, she'd gone from fighting a bandit for her purse to planning a wedding. It should have felt too fast, too reckless. Instead, it felt exactly right. The next morning at church, there was no hiding the change in their relationship. Elias sat beside Beatrice in the pew, close enough that their shoulders touched, and when he took her hand during the final hymn, several people smiled and nodded approvingly. After the service, they faced a barrage of congratulations and curiosity. News had spread quickly, probably thanks to Rosa, who'd apparently mentioned to someone at the general store that there would be a wedding at the Morgan Ranch soon. Most of the congregation was delighted. Parents whose children attended Beatrice's school expressed happiness that their beloved teacher would be staying in the community permanently. Sheriff Brennan clapped Elias on the back with genuine pleasure. Mr. Chen offered formal congratulations in carefully precise English, his wife beaming beside him. But not everyone was pleased. Mrs. Blackwood stood apart with Emily and Reverend Hutchins, her face set in lines of disapproval. As the crowd began to disperse, she approached with determined steps. Miss Langford, I understand congratulations are in order, though I must say this seems rather precipitous. You've barely been in Willow Creek 2 months. When you know something's right, Mrs. Blackwood, there's no point in waiting, Beatrice said evenly. Well, I assume you'll be resigning your position at the school once you're married. It wouldn't be appropriate for a married woman to continue teaching when there are unmarried women who need the work. Beatrice felt Elias tense beside her, but she squeezed his hand in warning. This was her battle to fight. Actually, Mrs. Blackwood, I have no intention of resigning. Marriage doesn't make me less qualified to teach. If anything, it strengthens my position in the community. But surely your husband will want you focused on domestic duties? Managing a ranch household is quite demanding. My husband, Elias said quietly, the word husband carrying a weight of possession and pride, wants his wife to continue doing work she loves and is extraordinarily good at. We'll figure out the household management together. Most irregular, Mrs. Blackwood sniffed, but I suppose we must make allowances for modern ideas, however misguided. Emily, come along. We have Sunday dinner to prepare. She swept away, Emily trailing behind with a last curious glance at Beatrice. Reverend Hutchins, however, remained. He studied them both with his penetrating gaze, then nodded slowly. I'll be honest with you both. I had reservations about Miss Langford when she first arrived. Too educated, too independent, too progressive. And I've had reservations about you, Morgan. Too egalitarian in your hiring practices, too irregular in your church attendance. He paused, and Beatrice braced herself for criticism. But I've been watching both of you these past weeks, and I've been impressed. Miss Langford, you've done more for our children's education in 2 months than we've seen in years. And Morgan, your vision for adult education and community betterment speaks well of your character. He smiled, an expression that transformed his stern face. I'd be honored to perform your wedding ceremony, if you'll have me. Beatrice and Elias exchanged surprised glances, then both nodded. We'd be honored, Reverend, Elias said. Good. Come see me this week, and we'll discuss the details. Reverend Hutchins tipped his hat and walked away, leaving them staring after him in pleased surprise. Well, Beatrice said, that was unexpected. The frontier has a way of breaking down old prejudices, Elias said. Out here, what you do matters more than where you came from or what rules you follow. Hutchins is smart enough to recognize that. The week that followed was a whirlwind of activity. Beatrice taught her regular classes during the day, but evenings were consumed with wedding planning. The date was set for 3 weeks away, the first Saturday in November. It would be a simple ceremony at the ranch, followed by a celebration with the whole town invited. Rosa threw herself into preparations with enthusiastic energy, planning menus and decorations, determining how many tables would be needed and where they'd be set up. Mrs. Abernathy helped Beatrice alter her best dress, the green one she'd worn to the dance, adding lace and new buttons to make it suitable for a wedding. "It's not traditional white," Mrs. Abernathy said, pins in her mouth as she worked on the hem. "But white's impractical out here anyway. The green suits you, brings out your eyes. And it's appropriate for a second marriage, even though this is technically your first." "Second marriage? Married to your work all these years, weren't you?" Mrs. Abernathy grinned. "This is just making it official with a person instead of a profession." Elias came to town every other day, helping with planning, but mostly just wanting to spend time with Beatrice. They took walks along the creek, talking about everything and nothing. He began teaching her to ride, patient and encouraging as she learned to control the gentle mare he'd selected for her. She fell off twice, just as she'd predicted, and both times he helped her back up with praise for her courage rather than criticism for her clumsiness. "You're a natural," he lied cheerfully after her second fall. "I'm terrible and you know it," Beatrice retorted, brushing dirt from her dress. "You're learning, which is all that matters. By our wedding day, you'll be riding confidently. By next spring, you'll be galloping across the range like you were born in the saddle." Optimist. Realist. I've seen what you can do when you set your mind to something. The shooting lessons continued as well, and Beatrice found herself actually enjoying them. There was something satisfying about the weight of the gun in her hand, the focus required to aim properly, the small victory of hitting her target. She was getting good enough that Sheriff Brennan stopped correcting her form and just watched approvingly. "You'll do," he said after one session. "Not saying you're ready to enter a shooting competition, but you can defend yourself if needed. That's the important thing." At school, the children were excited about their teacher's upcoming wedding. Billy Jenkins appointed himself as unofficial wedding coordinator for the students, organizing the younger children into singing a special song and the older ones into preparing readings. "We want to contribute," he explained seriously. "You've done so much for us. We want to do something for you." Beatrice found herself fighting tears. "That's very thoughtful, Billy. Thank you." "Wow. Plus, he added with a grin that reminded her he was still 12. "It'll be fun. We never get to go to fancy parties." 2 weeks before the wedding, Jack Dockery reappeared. Beatrice had almost forgotten about him, so consumed was she with wedding planning and teaching and learning to ride. But one afternoon as she was locking up the schoolhouse, she turned to find him leaning against the building, his arms crossed and his expression ugly. "Heard you're getting married," he said without preamble. "To Morgan. Moving up in the world, aren't you? From school teacher to rancher's wife." Beatrice's hand moved instinctively toward her reticule, where the gun rested. "Mr. Dockery, I have nothing to say to you." "That's cold, considering we got history. You bit me, remember? Still got the scar." He pushed off from the wall, taking a step toward her. "Thought maybe before you become all respectable and married, you might want to apologize for that." "I have nothing to apologize for. You tried to rob me. I defended myself." "See, that's the problem with you Eastern women. No respect. Think you can come out here and change everything, make all the rules about treating everyone equal, teaching children to question their betters." Another step closer. "Some of us liked things the way they were." Beatrice's heart was pounding, but she kept her voice steady. "Step back, Mr. Dockery. I'm not interested in whatever you're selling." "Not selling anything, just delivering a message." His smile was mean. "You think marrying Morgan makes you safe? Think having the school board and the sheriff on your side means you're untouchable? You're wrong. There are those of us who don't appreciate the changes you're making, who think maybe you should have stayed back east where you belong." "Is that a threat?" "It's a warning. Accidents happen out here. Horses bolt. Buildings catch fire. People get hurt." He shrugged. "Just saying you might want to watch yourself, you and your progressive ideas." "That's enough." The new voice came from behind Dockery, and Beatrice felt a wash of relief as Elias stepped into view. He must have been approaching from the other direction, come to walk her home. Dockery turned, his expression shifting from menacing to wary. "Morgan, didn't see you there. Clearly, otherwise you wouldn't be stupid enough to threaten my fiancée." Elias's voice was soft, almost conversational, but there was danger in every syllable. "We talked about this before, Jack. I told you to stay away from Miss Langford. Seems you didn't listen." "Wasn't threatening, just talking." "Funny, because it sounded a lot like a threat to me." Elias moved closer, positioning himself between Beatrice and Dockery. Let me make something very clear. Beatrice is under my protection. That means if anything happens to her, if she gets hurt, if her property gets damaged, if she so much as has a moment of fear or concern, I'm holding you personally responsible. And I won't go through the sheriff or the courts. I'll come straight to you. Understand? Dockery's face had gone pale. You can't. I can. And I will. Elias didn't raise his voice, didn't make any aggressive moves, but somehow he seemed larger, more dangerous. Now, you have two choices. You can leave Willow Creek tonight, head somewhere else to cause trouble. Or you can stay, keep your head down, and leave law-abiding citizens alone. But if you stay and you cause problems, especially for Beatrice, you'll answer to me. What's it going to be? For a long moment, Dockery just stared at him, calculation and fear warring on his face. Then he spat in the dust and turned away. Crazy bitch wasn't worth the trouble anyway, he muttered, and stalked off toward the saloon. Elias watched him go, tension in every line of his body. Only when Dockery had disappeared did he turn to Beatrice, his expression softening with concern. Are you all right? Did he hurt you? No, I'm fine, just shaken. She was trembling now that the danger had passed, adrenaline flooding her system. He said, he warned me that accidents could happen, buildings could catch fire. Elias's jaw tightened. I'm going to talk to Sheriff Brennan. We need to have Dockery watched, or better yet, encouraged to leave town permanently. Will he listen? Leave, I mean? Most bullies do when they realize they're outmatched. But I'm not taking chances with your safety. He pulled her close, and she leaned into his strength gratefully. Maybe you should move out to the ranch before the wedding. We'd have a chaperone, Rosa, or one of the hands, but you'd be safer there than in town. Beatrice pulled back enough to look at his face. No, I won't let fear dictate my choices. That's letting Dockery win. I'll be careful. I'll stay alert. I'll carry the gun with me at all times, but I won't hide. A smile tugged at Elias's lips despite his obvious worry. Why am I not surprised? That's my kind of woman, remember? I remember. She touched his face gently. But thank you for wanting to protect me, even though I'm stubborn about it. Especially because you're stubborn about it, he corrected. Come on, I'll walk you to Mrs. Abernathy's, and then I'm going straight to the sheriff. True to his word, Elias spoke with Sheriff Brennan that evening, and by the next morning the law was quietly keeping an eye on Jack Dockery's movements. 2 days later, Dockery left town, heading north toward Wyoming according to the rumor mill. Whether he'd been explicitly warned to leave or had just decided the situation was too hot, no one knew. But he was gone, and that was what mattered. The final week before the wedding passed in a blur of last-minute preparations and mounting excitement. The whole town seemed caught up in the celebration, offering gifts and assistance even from quarters Beatrice hadn't expected. Mr. Chen donated fabric for table coverings. Pete Hawkins and several other ranchers promised to bring meat for the feast. Even Mrs. Blackwood, though clearly still disapproving, sent over a set of embroidered linens with a stiff note of congratulations. The night before the wedding, Beatrice lay awake in her room at Mrs. Abernathy's, too excited to sleep. Tomorrow, her life would change completely. She'd move from this small room to the ranch house, from independent spinsterhood to married partnership, from Miss Langford to Mrs. Morgan. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it filled her with a joy so profound it almost hurt. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, fighting a bandit in the dusty street, earning the respect of her students, standing up to the school board, falling in love with a cowboy who valued her strength instead of trying to diminish it. Every challenge, every risk, every choice had led her to this moment. Tomorrow, she'd marry Elias Morgan. And together they'd build something neither of them could have built alone. A partnership of equals, a home filled with books and learning and love, a life worth living on their own terms. Beatrice smiled into the darkness and finally, peacefully, slept. The morning of the wedding dawned with a clarity that seemed almost miraculous. The sky a flawless expanse of blue stretching from horizon to horizon. Beatrice woke to Mrs. Abernathy knocking gently on her door, carrying a tray with tea and toast. Your last morning as Miss Langford, the older woman said, setting the tray on the small table by the window. How are you feeling, dear? Beatrice sat up, pushing her dark hair back from her face. Nervous, excited, terrified, happy, all of it at once. That sounds about right for a wedding day. Mrs. Abernathy sat on the edge of the bed, her expression tender. I want you to know how proud I am of you. You came here alone with nothing but courage and determination, and you've built something beautiful. Not just with Elias, though that's wonderful, but with your students, with this community. You've made a real difference. Tears pricked Beatrice's eyes. Thank you for everything, for taking me in, for supporting me, for becoming a friend when I needed one. Oh, now you'll make me cry, and we can't have that. We have to get you ready. Mrs. Abernathy stood, brushing at her eyes. Miss Patterson and Mrs. Chen are coming over in an hour to help with your hair and dress. In the meantime, eat something. You'll need your strength for the day ahead. Beatrice tried to eat, but her stomach was too full of butterflies to manage more than a few bites of toast. She sipped the tea, staring out the window at the town she'd come to love. In a few hours, she'd leave this room for the last time as a single woman. The next time she returned to Willow Creek, it would be as Elias's wife, riding in from the ranch for her teaching duties. True to Mrs. Abernathy's word, Miss Patterson and Mrs. Chen arrived promptly, bearing between them a package wrapped in brown paper. A gift from the women of Willow Creek, Mrs. Chen explained, her English more confident than it had been 2 months ago. Beatrice's evening lessons for the Chinese families had already begun, and Mrs. Chen attended faithfully. We all contribute. Inside the package was a beautiful shawl knitted from soft wool in a pattern of intertwined flowers. It must have represented hours of work from multiple women, each contributing their skill to create something both practical and lovely. It's beautiful, Beatrice whispered, running her fingers over the intricate stitches. Thank you, all of you. You wear it today, for warmth and for luck, Mrs. Chen said firmly. And you remember that you have friends here, many friends. The next 2 hours passed in a flurry of preparation. Miss Patterson, who had an unexpected talent for hairstyling, worked Beatrice's dark hair into an elegant arrangement, softening her usual severe style with curls that framed her face. Mrs. Chen helped her into the altered green dress, fastening the long row of buttons down the back with patient fingers. When Beatrice finally looked at herself in the full-length mirror Mrs. Abernathy had brought up from the parlor, she barely recognized the woman staring back. The green dress, transformed by lace and new buttons and careful alterations, looked almost elegant. Her hair, freed from its usual tight bun, softened her features. And her eyes, her gray eyes that had always seemed so serious, sparkled with happiness and anticipation. You look beautiful, Miss Patterson said softly. Truly beautiful. Elias will not know what hit him, Mrs. Chen added with a smile. Mrs. Abernathy appeared in the doorway, already dressed in her best Sunday clothes. The wagons are here to take us to the ranch. Are you ready, dear? Beatrice took one last look around the small room that had been her home for these transformative 2 months. Then she picked up the shawl, draping it around her shoulders, and nodded. I'm ready. The ride out to the Morgan Ranch felt both endless and too short. Beatrice sat in the wagon with Mrs. Abernathy and the other ladies, while Mr. Harding drove. Behind them came another wagon carrying supplies for the feast, and behind that, a stream of townspeople on horseback or in their own wagons, all heading to the ranch for the celebration. As they crested the rise and the ranch came into view, Beatrice caught her breath. Rosa and the ranch hands had transformed the yard into something magical. Tables had been set up in a large circle, covered with the fabric Mr. Chen had donated. Wildflowers in mason jars served as centerpieces. Lanterns hung from posts driven into the ground, ready to be lit as evening approached. And in the center of it all, beneath an arbor woven from cottonwood branches and late-blooming sage, stood Reverend Hutchins in his best black suit. People were already arriving, gathering in clusters to chat and admire the preparations. Beatrice saw her students running between the adults, their faces bright with excitement. Billy Jenkins was attempting to organize them into some kind of order, with mixed success. And there, standing near the house talking to Sheriff Brennan and Mayor Donovan, was Elias. He wore a new suit, black trousers, a white shirt so crisp it must be fresh from the shop, a black vest embroidered with silver thread, and a string tie at his throat. His dark hair had been trimmed and combed back, and he'd shaved so recently his jaw still looked slightly raw. But it was his expression that made Beatrice's heart turn over, a mixture of joy and nervousness and wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe this was really happening. When he saw her wagon approach, his face transformed with such pure happiness that Beatrice felt tears threaten again. Mr. Harding helped her down, and suddenly Beatrice was surrounded by well-wishers, parents congratulating her, students hugging her, townspeople offering blessings and advice. Through the crowd, she kept catching glimpses of Elias, who was similarly surrounded but kept looking toward her as if he needed to confirm she was really there. Finally, Rosa appeared and began herding people toward the seating area with firm efficiency. Enough chattering. We have a wedding to conduct. Everyone find a place to stand or sit. You can congratulate them properly after they're married. The crowd sorted itself out, forming a semicircle around the arbor. Beatrice found herself standing with Mrs. Abernathy on one side and Miss Patterson on the other, suddenly unsure of the protocol. She'd never been to a frontier wedding. Was there supposed to be music? A processional? Someone to give her away? But Elias solved the problem by simply walking over to her, ignoring convention entirely, and offering his hand. "Ready?" he asked quietly, and in his eyes she saw the same nervousness she felt, the same joy, the same certainty that this was right. "Ready," she confirmed, placing her hand in his. Together they walked to the arbor where Reverend Hutchins waited. The crowd fell silent, and somewhere a bird sang, the sound clear and sweet in the afternoon air. Reverend Hutchins cleared his throat and began. "We are gathered here today in the sight of God in this community to witness the union of Elias Morgan and Beatrice Langford in holy matrimony. This is a sacred commitment, not to be entered into lightly, but with full understanding of the responsibilities and joys it brings." He paused, looking at them both with an expression that was surprisingly gentle. "I've known Elias Morgan for 7 years. I've watched him build his ranch through hard work and determination, watched him treat every person with dignity, regardless of their station, watched him grow into a man of character and principle. And I've known Miss Langford for 2 months, but in that short time, she's shown herself to be a woman of courage, intelligence, and unwavering commitment to what's right." The Reverend's gaze swept over the assembled crowd. "Some might say this marriage is unconventional, that it's happening too quickly, that a school teacher and a rancher make an odd match, that a woman of Miss Langford's education and independence shouldn't be getting married at all. But I say that what matters isn't convention. What matters is that two people have found each other who bring out the best in one another, who share values and vision, who are committed to building something meaningful together." He turned back to Elias and Beatrice. "Marriage is a partnership of equals, each bringing their own strengths, supporting each other through challenges, celebrating each other's successes. It requires honesty, patience, forgiveness, and above all, love. Not just the passionate feeling of new romance, but the steady, enduring commitment to another person's well-being and growth." Reverend Hutchins opened his Bible. From Ecclesiastes, "Two are better than one, because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Also, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken." He closed the Bible and looked at Elias. "Elias Morgan, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? Do you promise to love her, honor her, support her dreams and ambitions, stand by her in times of trouble, and build with her a life based on mutual respect and affection?" Elias's voice was steady and sure. "I do, with all my heart." "And Beatrice Langford, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Do you promise to love him, honor him, support his endeavors, stand by him in times of trouble, and build with him a life based on mutual respect and affection?" Beatrice felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but her voice was as steady as Elias's. "I do. Absolutely." "The rings?" Sheriff Brennan stepped forward, producing 2 simple gold bands. Elias had ordered them from Denver, and they'd arrived just 2 days before, plain but beautiful in their simplicity. Elias took Beatrice's left hand, his own trembling slightly as he slid the ring onto her finger. With this ring I thee wed. You're my partner, my equal, my love. Everything I have is yours. Everything I am is yours, for as long as we both live. Beatrice took the other ring and slid it onto Elias's work-roughened finger. With this ring I thee wed. You're my partner, my equal, my love. Everything I have is yours. Everything I am is yours, for as long as we both live. Reverend Hutchins smiled, a rare and genuine expression. By the power vested in me by the Colorado Territory and by God Almighty, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Elias, you may kiss your bride. Elias needed no further encouragement. He pulled Beatrice close and kissed her thoroughly, to the delight of the watching crowd. Cheers erupted, along with whistling and applause. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying at the same time, Beatrice caught sight of her students in the front row. Billy Jenkins was grinning widely, and beside him, little Emma Chen was jumping up and down with excitement. The Kowalski twins were holding hands, looking solemn and happy at the same time. Even Emily Blackwood, standing with her disapproving mother, had a small smile on her face. "Ladies and gentlemen," Reverend Hutchins announced, "I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Elias Morgan." More cheers, more applause. Beatrice found herself being hugged by what felt like every person in Willow Creek. Mrs. Abernathy was crying openly. Rosa was beaming with pride. Miguel and the other ranch hands were congratulating Elias with enthusiastic backslapping that made him wince and laugh. Then Billy Jenkins stepped forward, clearing his throat importantly. "Mrs. Morgan?" He stopped, grinned at the newness of the name, then continued. "Me and the other students, we prepared something for you and Mr. Morgan. If everyone could quiet down for a minute?" The crowd settled, and the children arranged themselves in a loose group. Billy counted them in, and they began to sing. It was a simple song, one about journeys and new beginnings and finding home, but it was sung with such earnest enthusiasm that Beatrice felt fresh tears flowing. When the song ended, Annabelle Hawkins stepped forward with a package wrapped in newspaper. "We all contributed," she said shyly. "It's not much, but we wanted to give you something." Beatrice unwrapped the package to find a book, a beautiful leather-bound journal with blank pages. On the first page, each student had written their name and a short message. "For writing your story together," Billy explained. "We figured you're both big on reading and learning, so maybe you'd want to write down your adventures. For posterity and all that." Elias looked over Beatrice's shoulder at the journal, his arm around her waist. "This is perfect," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you, all of you. We'll treasure this." "Now can we eat?" Tommy Fitzgerald called out, breaking the tender moment with typical childhood practicality. "I'm starving!" Laughter rippled through the crowd, and Rosa clapped her hands. "Yes, yes, everyone to the tables. Food is ready." The feast that followed was everything a frontier celebration should be. Tables groaned under the weight of roasted beef and pork, fresh bread, vegetables from late gardens, pies and cakes contributed by nearly every family in attendance. People ate and talked and laughed, toasting the newlyweds with whatever beverage they had in hand, coffee, cider, or in some cases whiskey that appeared from hidden flasks. Mayor Donovan gave a rambling speech about love and community and the future of Willow Creek. Sheriff Brennan offered a toast that was surprisingly eloquent, comparing marriage to a good partnership between lawmen, built on trust, communication, and having each other's backs. Mr. Chen spoke briefly in careful English about the importance of education and the honor of having Mrs. Morgan as teacher for his daughter. Even Mrs. Blackwood, after what was clearly an internal struggle, stood and offered stiff congratulations. "Mr. and Mrs. Morgan, while I may have had reservations about certain unconventional aspects of this union, I cannot deny that you both demonstrate commitment to this community. I wish you happiness and success." It wasn't warm, but it was something. Beatrice caught Elias's eye and saw her own amusement reflected there. Some battles were won not through dramatic victory, but through simple persistence. As the afternoon wore into evening, the lanterns were lit, casting warm pools of light across the yard. Someone produced a fiddle, and music began. Elias claimed the first dance with his bride, and as they moved together under the stars, Beatrice felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. "Happy?" Elias murmured, his hand warm at her waist. Impossibly happy. Scared, too. This is all so new, so different from anything I imagined for my life. Scared is normal, but we'll figure it out together. That's the whole point of this. He spun her gently, and she laughed, remembering how awkward they'd both been at the town dance just weeks ago. They'd improved considerably. Besides, you fought a bandit for your purse and won. Marriage can't be harder than that. Marriage might actually be harder, Beatrice teased. Bandits are straightforward. Husbands are complicated. Thanks for that. You're welcome. They danced until her feet ached, then sat at the head table watching others take their turns on the improvised dance floor. Parents danced with children, old couples moved together with the ease of decades of practice, and young people courted under the guise of acceptable celebration. Pete Hawkins approached with his wife Martha, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes and work-worn hands. Mrs. Morgan, I wanted to introduce my Martha properly. She's heard so much about you from the children. Mrs. Hawkins, I'm so pleased to meet you. Your children are wonderful. Annabelle especially has such a gift for reading. Martha's face lit up. She does, doesn't she? I always knew she was special, but having you recognize it, teach her properly. It means the world. She paused, then continued shyly, I was wondering, those evening classes you mentioned for adults? Would women be welcome? I'd dearly love to improve my reading, maybe learn to write more than just my name. Of course women are welcome. In fact, I was hoping women would attend. We'll start after the new year. Give me time to settle into married life. Beatrice smiled warmly. I look forward to having you in class, Mrs. Hawkins. After Martha and Pete moved on, Elias leaned close. You're going to change this whole town. You know that? One student at a time, one mind at a time, you're going to transform what's possible here. We're going to change it, Beatrice corrected. This is a partnership, remember? Fair enough. We're going to change it. As the evening deepened and stars multiplied overhead, the crowd gradually began to thin. Families with young children departed first, followed by older folks who'd already put in a full day of celebration. By the time the moon rose, only a handful of people remained. Rosa and Mrs. Abernathy cleaning up, Miguel and a few ranch hands banking the fires, Sheriff Brennan and Mayor Donovan finishing the last of the whiskey while engaged in philosophical debate about the nature of justice. Finally, even they departed, leaving Elias and Beatrice alone in the lantern-lit yard. Come on, Elias said, offering his hand. There's something I want to show you. He led her away from the house, up the same hill they'd climbed during her first visit to the ranch. At the top, he spread out a blanket he'd somehow had the foresight to leave there earlier, and they sat down together, looking out over the ranch that was now her home. The valley below was peaceful, the buildings casting long shadows in the moonlight. The creek caught and reflected the stars, a ribbon of silver winding through the darkness. In the distance, cattle lowed softly, and somewhere an owl called. This is what I wanted you to see, Elias said quietly. Not just the ranch, but the whole sky. On clear nights like this, you can see forever. When I first came here, used to fighting for every scrap in Missouri, this vastness terrified me. All this space, all this potential, all this responsibility. It felt overwhelming. He turned to look at her, his face silvered by moonlight. But over time, I learned that vastness isn't frightening. It's freeing. Out here, we can be whoever we choose to be, build whatever life we can imagine. We're not trapped by old expectations or rigid hierarchies. We're limited only by our courage and our willingness to work. Beatrice leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him. That's why I came west, not because I knew what I wanted, but because I knew what I didn't want. A life already decided for me. A future of genteel poverty and pitying glances. I wanted possibility. I wanted to matter. You do matter. To me, to your students, to this community. You matter so much, Beatrice. His arm came around her shoulders, holding her close. I keep thinking about that first day, how you refused to let go of your purse even when it would have been safer to just surrender. That stubbornness, that refusal to give up what's yours, that's what makes you extraordinary. It's also what makes me difficult to live with, Beatrice warned. I'm opinionated and independent, and I won't always defer to your judgment just because you're my husband. Good. I don't want a wife who defers. I want a partner who challenges me, keeps me honest, makes me better than I'd be alone. He kissed the top of her head gently. though I reserve the right to occasionally be annoyed by your stubbornness. And I reserve the right to occasionally be annoyed by yours. Deal." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. Then Elias said, "I have something for you. A wedding gift." He produced a small package from his vest pocket. Beatrice unwrapped it carefully to find a beautifully bound copy of Jane Eyre, one of the books she'd mentioned loving during their many conversations. "Open it," he urged. She opened the cover to find an inscription in his careful handwriting. "To my fierce Beatrice, who fought for what was hers and won my heart in the process. May you always remain as brave and stubborn as the day we met. With all my love, Elias." November 1878. Tears blurred her vision. "Elias, it's perfect. I have something for you too." She'd hidden her gift in the folds of her shawl. It was smaller than his, wrapped in brown paper. When he opened it, he found a leather bookmark she'd tooled herself during rare free moments, working late into the night at Mrs. Abernathy's. Burned into the leather were the words, "That's my kind of woman." Elias laughed, the sound full of joy and recognition. "I'll never live that down, will I?" "Never. It's our origin story, the moment everything changed." She took the bookmark from him and slipped it into the Jane Eyre volume, marking the first page. "Every time you use this, you'll remember." "I don't need a bookmark to remember. That moment is burned into my memory forever. The bravest woman I'd ever seen, covered in dust and defiance, refusing to give up." He set the book aside carefully and turned to face her fully. "Beatrice Morgan, I promise you this. I will spend every day of our life together earning the right to call you my wife. I will support your dreams, celebrate your victories, stand by you through challenges. I will never try to diminish your strength or tame your spirit, and I will love you fiercely, faithfully, forever." Beatrice felt tears sliding down her cheeks again, but they were happy tears, the kind that came from emotion too big to contain. "And I promise you this. I will be your true partner, sharing both burden and joy. I will respect your work and your vision. I will challenge you when you need it and support you always. I will never stop fighting for what matters, for our life together, for our community, for the future we're building, and I will love you with all my stubborn, opinionated, independent heart." They kissed under the vast Colorado sky, two people who'd found each other against all odds, who'd chosen courage over comfort, possibility over predictability. When they finally pulled apart, Elias stood and helped Beatrice to her feet. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Morgan." She looked down at the ranch spread below them, their ranch now, their home, their future. Then she looked at the man beside her, strong and steady, and hers. "Yes," she said simply, "I'm ready." They walked down the hill hand in hand toward the house where Rosa had left lanterns burning in welcome. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Beatrice would have to balance teaching with ranch life. They'd have to navigate the complexities of marriage. They'd face opposition from those who disliked change. But tonight was for celebrating what they'd found together, what they'd chosen despite fear and uncertainty. The next morning, Beatrice woke in the master bedroom of the ranch house, sunlight streaming through windows that looked out over the valley. For a moment, she was disoriented, forgetting where she was. Then she felt Elias beside her, felt his arm around her waist, and memory flooded back. She was married. She was home. Elias stirred, his eyes opening. When he saw her watching him, he smiled sleepily. "Morning, wife." "Morning, husband." "Any regrets?" "Not a single one." "You?" "Only that I didn't meet you sooner." He stretched, then sat up. "Rosa will have breakfast ready soon, and then, unfortunately, I have to check on the herd. Miguel mentioned some possible strays yesterday. Reality intrudes even on newlyweds. And I need to prepare tomorrow's lessons. The school board gave me today and Monday off, but Tuesday I'm back to teaching." Beatrice sat up as well, reaching for the dressing gown Rosa had left for her. Welcome to married life, romantic and practical in equal measure. They breakfasted with Rosa, who fussed over them like a proud mother. Then Elias headed out to work, while Beatrice spent the morning exploring her new home more thoroughly. The house was larger than it had seemed during her first visit, with 3 bedrooms upstairs, the master bedroom and Rosa's room on the main floor, and various storage spaces and closets. But what captured her attention was the library. Elias had clearly been adding to it recently. Several boxes of new books sat unopened in one corner. Beatrice spent a happy hour unpacking them, discovering volumes on everything from advanced mathematics to contemporary poetry, from agricultural science to Greek philosophy. He ordered those especially, Rosa said, appearing in the doorway with fresh coffee. Said he wanted you to have plenty to read, that a good library was essential for a household of learning. He's extraordinary, Beatrice said softly. He is, and so are you. You're good for each other, I think. You make each other braver. Rosa set down the coffee tray. Now, we should discuss household matters. I know you'll be teaching most days, so I can handle the daily cooking and cleaning. But perhaps on weekends you might want to take over some tasks, learn to make bread, tend the garden. I'd like that. I'm not very skilled at domestic tasks. My education focused more on academics than housekeeping, but I'm willing to learn. Good. We'll start with bread next Saturday. It's satisfying work kneading dough. Good for thinking. Rosa smiled. And between the two of us, we'll keep this house running smoothly so Elias can focus on the ranch and you can focus on teaching. They spent the rest of the morning planning household routines, with Rosa patiently explaining the rhythms of ranch life. Meals had to be substantial and early. Elias and the hands started work at dawn and needed fuel for hard labor. Laundry was done on Mondays, baking on Wednesdays and Saturdays. The kitchen garden would need attention as long as the weather held, then would be put to bed for winter. It was a different world from Boston, where servants had handled such matters, and Beatrice had focused solely on intellectual pursuits. But she found she didn't mind the practicality of it. There was something satisfying about understanding how a household functioned, about contributing to its maintenance. When Elias returned at midday for dinner, he found Beatrice in the library, surrounded by books and making notes. Planning lessons? He asked. Planning the adult education curriculum. I'm thinking we'll start with basic literacy, reading and writing, but also include some practical mathematics, basic bookkeeping, maybe some geography and history. She looked up at him, her eyes bright with excitement. I've been thinking about what you said, about creating opportunities. Education isn't just about reading classic literature. It's about giving people tools to improve their circumstances, to understand contracts and laws, to participate fully in society. Elias sat down beside her, looking over her notes. This is ambitious. You'll have students ranging from complete illiterates to people who just want to improve their skills. How will you manage the different levels? The same way I do with the children. Individual attention within a group setting, pairing more advanced students with struggling ones, creating lessons that work at multiple levels. She smiled. It'll be challenging, but challenge is what makes teaching worthwhile. When do you want to start? January, like I told Mrs. Hawkins. That gives us 2 months to settle into married life, get through the Christmas season, and let me finish the fall term with the day students. Then we can open the evening classes 2 nights a week, say Tuesday and Thursday, 7 to 9 in the evening. Where will you hold them? The schoolhouse? Beatrice hesitated. I was thinking about that. The schoolhouse belongs to the town, and I'd need permission from the school board. Mrs. Blackwood would probably object to using it for adult classes, especially for ranch hands and workers she considers beneath notice. What if we held classes here? Use this room? It's certainly large enough, and we have the books right here for reference. Elias considered this, then nodded slowly. I like it. Makes this house a center of learning, not just a ranch headquarters. And it solves the transportation problem. I can bring my hands here after dinner, and they won't have to make the trip to town and back in the dark. They talked through the details over dinner, their excitement building as the vision took shape. By the time the meal ended, they'd sketched out a basic curriculum, identified potential challenges, and discussed how to spread the word about the classes. We'll make an announcement at church, Beatrice decided. And I'll mention it to parents when they come to collect their children from school. Anyone who wants to learn will be welcome. Men, women, anyone willing to work hard. My kind of woman, Elias said, echoing that first day. Fighting for what matters, expanding what's possible. The following week settled into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural despite its novelty. Beatrice rose at dawn with Elias, sharing breakfast with him and Rosa before riding her mare into town for school. The ride became easier with practice, and she found she enjoyed the quiet time to think, to prepare mentally for the day ahead. Teaching continued to be both challenging and rewarding. Billy Jenkins had progressed to reading Macbeth and was writing remarkably insightful essays about ambition and power. Emma Chen could now read simple books independently, her confidence growing daily. The Kowalski twins had received a letter from their grandmother in Poland and had read it aloud to the whole class, translating as they went. Even Emily Blackwood had softened somewhat, her superior attitude mellowing into something approaching genuine interest in learning. Beatrice suspected this had less to do with any change in Mrs. Blackwood's views and more to do with Emily developing her own opinions, but she'd take progress wherever it came from. In the evenings, Beatrice returned to the ranch, where she helped Rosa with household tasks, spent time with Elias discussing the day's events, and prepared lessons in the library that was becoming her favorite room in the house. Elias often worked at the desk in the corner while she graded papers or planned curriculum, the two of them occupying the same space in comfortable companionship. On Saturday evenings, they read aloud to each other from whatever book had captured their interest that week. Sometimes they discussed what they read. Sometimes they simply enjoyed the story. It was intimate and intellectual at once, exactly the kind of partnership Beatrice had dreamed of but never quite believed possible. The first real test of their marriage came in mid-November, when an early blizzard swept down from the mountains without warning. Beatrice was at school when the storm hit, the sky going from clear to ominous in less than an hour. She dismissed the students early, making sure each child had safe transportation home or could shelter with families in town. But as the snow began to fall in earnest, Beatrice realized she couldn't make it back to the ranch. The 5-mile ride would be treacherous in these conditions, potentially deadly if she lost her way. She'd have to stay in town, probably at Mrs. Abernathy's. She was locking up the schoolhouse when Elias appeared, leading both Storm and her mare, both horses already dusted with snow. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. "You should be at the ranch, making sure everything's secure." "Miguel can handle the ranch. I came to make sure you were safe." His voice was calm but firm. "We need to get you back before this gets worse." "Elias, that's foolish. I can stay with Mrs. Abernathy. You shouldn't have risked. You're my wife, my responsibility, and I won't spend a storm worrying whether you're all right when I could be making sure of it." He helped her onto her mare, his hand steady. "We're going home, Beatrice. Together." Part of her wanted to argue, to insist she could take care of herself, but a larger part recognized this for what it was. Not control, but care. Not diminishing her independence, but extending partnership into protection. "All right," she said, "but if we die in this blizzard, I'm going to be very annoyed with you." Noted. The ride back was harrowing. Snow fell so thick they could barely see 10 feet ahead. Wind cut through Beatrice's clothes, despite her shawl and coat. But Elias knew the land intimately, guiding them with absolute certainty, even when the trail disappeared beneath accumulating snow. When they finally reached the ranch, both nearly frozen, Rosa had hot coffee and warm blankets waiting. She fussed over them both, scolding Elias for taking such a risk while simultaneously praising his devotion. Later, warm and dry and safe, Beatrice sat with Elias by the fire while the storm raged outside. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for coming for me. I know I protested, but thank you. You don't have to thank me for caring about your safety. That's not negotiable." He pulled her closer. "But I understand why you resisted. You fought so hard for independence, it feels like accepting help is the same as surrendering it. It's not, though. Independence means having choices, not refusing all assistance." "I'm still learning that," Beatrice admitted. "Still learning to accept care without feeling diminished by it." "We're both learning. That's what marriage is. Continuous learning about each other, about ourselves, about how to be together without losing who we are individually." The storm lasted 2 days, trapping them all at the ranch. But it turned out to be a gift in disguise. Time to simply be together without the press of daily responsibilities, time to talk and read and strengthen the bonds still so new between them. When the storm finally cleared, revealing a world transformed by snow, Beatrice rode back to town to resume teaching. But something had shifted. She no longer felt torn between independence and partnership. She'd learned it was possible to be both fully herself and fully committed to another person, that strength could be shared without being diminished. December brought preparations for Christmas and growing excitement about the upcoming evening classes. Word had spread, and Beatrice had a list of nearly 20 adults who wanted to attend. Ranch hands from various properties, some of the Chinese workers from town, several women including Martha Hawkins, and even old Pete Hawkins himself, who confessed he'd like to improve his reading enough to tackle more complex material. "Never too old to learn," he said gruffly, "and my Annabelle keeps bringing home books I can't hardly read. Time I kept up with my own daughter." Beatrice spent her Christmas break preparing materials, creating lesson plans flexible enough to accommodate different skill levels. Elias helped, using his own experience learning to read as a guide for what adult students might need. On Christmas Day, they hosted a dinner for those who had nowhere else to go. Miguel and two other ranch hands whose families were too far away to visit, Rosa, who had no family left, Mrs. Abernathy, whose own children lived back east. It was a humble celebration by Boston standards, but Beatrice found it more meaningful than any elaborate society dinner she'd attended in her former life. The evening classes began in January, just as planned. That first Tuesday night, nervous students gathered in the ranch library, clutching slates and pencils, their faces showing a mixture of hope and fear. Beatrice stood before them, remembering her own first day teaching in Willow Creek, and smiled. "Welcome. You're all here because you want to learn, because you believe education can improve your circumstances. That belief is the most important thing you bring to this room. Everything else, reading, writing, arithmetic, those are just tools. Tools we'll master together." She started with the basics, just as she had with the children. The alphabet, letter sounds, simple words. But she quickly discovered that teaching adults was different from teaching children. Adults brought life experience, context, motivation that children often lacked. They might struggle with decoding words, but once they understood a concept, they grasped its implications immediately. Miguel, who spoke Spanish fluently, learned to read English with remarkable speed once he understood the phonetic patterns. Martha Hawkins, who'd been reading by memorizing words rather than understanding how letters worked together, suddenly unlocked whole new possibilities. One of the Chinese workers, who already read in Mandarin, transferred that literacy to English with determined focus. Elias attended when he could, not as a student but as an assistant, helping with one-on-one instruction while Beatrice worked with the larger group. Watching him patiently help a struggling ranch hand sound out words, his face patient and encouraging, Beatrice fell in love with him all over again. By February, some students were reading simple books. By March, several could write basic letters. And by April, when the prairie was beginning to green up again and cattle were calving, Beatrice had a classroom full of adults who'd transformed their own possibilities through education. One evening in late April, after the students had left and Beatrice was tidying up the library, Elias came and wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Tired?" he asked, feeling her lean back against him. "Exhausted, but happy." She turned in his embrace. "Did you see Pete Hawkins tonight? He read an entire chapter from that agricultural manual without help. 6 months ago, he could barely spell his own name." "I saw. And I saw you too. The way you lit up when he succeeded, like his achievement was your achievement." Elias kissed her forehead gently. "You're changing lives, Beatrice. Mine included." "Our lives," she corrected. "We're changing them together." "Speaking of together," Elias said, his tone shifting to something more serious but also more joyful, "I have something to tell you, or rather, ask you. The ranch is doing well enough that I'm thinking of expanding, buying the property to the north. It would give us access to better water, more grazing, but it's a significant investment and it would mean leaner years while we pay it off." "Why are you asking me?" Beatrice said softly. "It's your ranch. It's our ranch and our future. I'm not making major decisions without your input." He studied her face. "What do you think? Should we expand, take the risk, or play it safe?" Beatrice thought about the woman she'd been when she arrived in Willow Creek, desperate for safety, clinging to her purse because it represented security. She thought about the woman she'd become, someone who'd learned that the biggest risks often brought the biggest rewards, that playing it safe sometimes meant losing everything important. "I think we should expand," she said firmly. "I think we should take the risk and build something bigger than what we have now. Together." Elias's smile was radiant. "That's my kind of woman. And you're my kind of man." They sealed the decision with a kiss. There in the library, surrounded by books and the evidence of transformed lives. Two people who'd found each other against all odds and were building something neither could have built alone. Late that night, after Rosa had gone to bed and the ranch was quiet, Beatrice sat at the desk in the library with the journal her students had given her as a wedding gift. She'd been adding to it sporadically, recording moments and memories she wanted to preserve. Now, by lamplight, she wrote, "6 months ago, I fought a bandit for my purse on a dusty street, and a cowboy said, 'That's my kind of woman.' Today, that cowboy is my husband, and that dusty street is part of the town where I teach. I came west seeking escape and found purpose instead. I came alone and found partnership. I came afraid and found courage I didn't know I possessed. This is not the life I imagined for myself. It's better. It's real. It's mine, ours. And every day I'm grateful I was brave enough to fight for what I wanted, stubborn enough to refuse what I didn't, and open enough to accept love when it arrived. This is my story, our story, and it's only just beginning." She closed the journal and looked out the window at the vast Colorado sky, stars scattered like diamonds across the darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and cattle lowed in response. The sounds of the frontier, harsh and beautiful, exactly like the life she'd chosen. Elias appeared in the doorway, holding 2 cups of tea. "Writing?" "Recording, so someday when we're old and our memories are fading, we can remember how it all began." She accepted the tea gratefully. "Come sit with me. Tell me what you're thinking about." He settled beside her, their shoulders touching in comfortable intimacy. "I'm thinking about the future, about the children we might have someday, how they'll grow up in a world we're helping to build. I'm thinking about the adult students reading their first books, about your day students learning to think critically and question assumptions. I'm thinking about how one brave woman refusing to surrender her purse changed my entire life. One patient cowboy saw something in that woman worth cherishing," Beatrice countered. "Worth waiting for, worth protecting, worth building a life with." "We saw each other," Elias said simply. "Really saw each other, not the surface, but the truth underneath. That's the real miracle. Not the falling in love, but the recognition. Like we'd been waiting our whole lives to find someone who understood what mattered." They sat together in the lamplight, sipping tea and talking quietly about small things and large ones, about tomorrow's tasks and next year's dreams. Outside, the vast prairie stretched in all directions, wild and beautiful and full of possibility. And in that warm circle of light, in that house that had become home, 2 people who'd chosen courage over comfort built their future one conversation, one shared dream, one moment of recognition at a time. Years later, when people asked Beatrice how she'd come to Willow Creek, how she'd met her husband, she always told the same story. About fighting a bandit for her purse, about a cowboy who'd tipped his hat and said, "That's my kind of woman," about learning that real strength means knowing when to fight alone and when to fight together. And when people asked if she'd ever regretted leaving Boston, leaving her old life behind, she'd smile and shake her head. Because she hadn't left anything important. She'd found it instead. Found herself, found purpose, found love that enhanced rather than diminished, found a partnership that made both of them stronger than they'd been alone. The school thrived under her care, producing students who went on to build businesses and write books and change the territory in small and large ways. The evening classes continued for years, transforming dozens of lives, giving people tools to shape their own futures. And the ranch prospered, growing into one of the most successful operations in Colorado, known for its fair treatment of workers and its commitment to community betterment. But when Beatrice Morgan looked back on her life in her final years, surrounded by children and grandchildren, what she remembered most clearly was that first moment, dusty and bleeding and triumphant, clutching her purse while a cowboy looked at her with respect and recognition and said the words that would change everything. "That's my kind of woman." And she'd become exactly that, a woman who fought for what mattered, who loved fiercely, who built something meaningful from courage and stubbornness and hope. She'd become her own kind of woman, and in doing so had found her perfect match. The story that began with a fight in a dusty street became a legend in Willow Creek, told and retold until it took on mythic proportions. But the truth beneath the legend was simpler and more profound. 2 people who recognized each other across the distance of different worlds, who chose to build a bridge between those worlds, who proved that love rooted in respect and equality could weather any storm. That was the real story. That was the legacy. That was the truth worth fighting for, from that first defiant moment to the last peaceful breath. And it all began because Beatrice Langford refused to let go of what was hers.